For as long as I can remember, there has been a phrase that rattled around in my mind like an old song stuck on repeat: you can't have your cake and eat it too. It was one of those sayings my mom would toss out during our weekly Sunday dinners, not that I ever really understood what it meant. I mean, if you had cake, wouldn't you want to eat it? That question had gnawed at me since I was a kid, and as I grew up, I started to view this conundrum as a metaphor for my life choices, especially as I navigated the tricky waters of my on-again, off-again relationship with Jess. Jess and I had met in college, our paths colliding like two planets destined to orbit one another. We had our highs, filled with the light of new love, lazy Sunday mornings, laughing endlessly over board games, late-night cooking experiments that usually ended in disaster. But the lows could drag us deeper than I cared to admit, arguments about petty things that ballooned into volcanic eruptions, only for us to push reset and pretend they never happened. It was after one such heated fight about where we wanted our lives to go that I found myself on Reddit, sipping my lukewarm coffee, scrolling through Ask Reddit threads, looking for solace or validation. Someone had posted about phrases that made no sense, and there it was again, the phrase that haunted me: you can't have your cake and eat it too. I chuckled bitterly, realizing that it encapsulated my dilemma perfectly. I wanted both the stability of a committed relationship and the freedom to explore who I was apart from Jess. And with each scroll, my mind started to race. Was I being unfair by wanting both? As I deliberated, a thought struck me: maybe I was supposed to just decide, but how could I when each option felt fundamentally flawed? Jess had been so supportive of my dreams, but I couldn't shake this feeling that I was suffocating her with my indecisiveness. I decided to invite her over, thinking it might be easier to untangle these thoughts together. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the window, highlighting the chaos of our living room, books scattered on the floor, takeout containers still on the counter. When Jess arrived, her smile lit the room, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension vibrating between us. We sat on the couch, awkwardly trying to make small talk, but it soon fell flat. Finally, I took a deep breath and plunged into the depths of my thoughts, spilling out my fears and uncertainties while she listened, her face a mixture of surprise and understanding. I confess that I felt like I was wanting something I couldn't clearly define. Jess nodded, allowing me to speak without interruption, and when I finished venting, she looked at me softly. "It sounds like you're scared, but not of me or us," she replied delicately. "You're scared of becoming stagnant." Her words hung in the air, heavy with recognition. I hadn't put it together until she said it, but she was right. A part of me longed for adventure, the wild insatiable need to travel, to breathe experiences beyond the confines of our small town. Jess offered to help me explore that, suggesting weekend trips or classes that could satiate my craving for more, grounding me while still letting me spread my wings. And as we talked into the night, I felt that familiar warmth settle back into my chest. When I finally went to bed, it struck me, perhaps the real wisdom was in the idea that choices didn't have to be rigid. Maybe I didn't have to sacrifice one happiness for another. Maybe I could bake two cakes, one for now, and one for later. Weeks passed, and our dynamic transformed. We found ourselves signing up for dance classes together and planning a small trip to the mountains, combining my longing for freedom with our shared commitment. The phrase that had once felt so suffocating began to lose its power over me. I realized that while you can't have your cake and eat it too in a literal sense, life isn't always that black and white. The more I allowed Jess in on my dreams, the more support I felt, freeing me to embrace the complexities of my existence. In the spirit of the Reddit threads I had once sought comfort in, I thought it fitting to provide a little update, an epilogue of sorts. About a month later, Jess and I were planning a spontaneous trip to a beach we hadn't been to since early summer. As we drove, I turned the radio down and asked, "So, what do you want to do after this? More travel? Classes?" She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "How about both? We can have our cake and eat it too," she teased, and I burst into laughter, realizing that perhaps my journey to find balance was one I could continue sharing with her. That night, as I fell asleep, I felt liberated knowing that my life didn't have to adhere to anyone else's rules, and while I might never fully grasp the meaning behind that silly saying, I could at least make my own sense of it all. The days that followed were a delightful haze of spontaneous adventures and late-night musings, the kind of soft chaos that comes from living life on your own terms. Every morning, we'd meet at our favorite cafe, a cozy little place with creaky wooden floors and mismatched chairs that felt like an extension of our own eclectic personalities. The owner, an eccentric old man named Jonah, would greet us with the same goofy grin each time, saying, "You're two peas in a pod, ladies." It became a running joke, one that made us chuckle as we sipped steaming cups of coffee and shared our dreams, from obscure travel destinations to the prospect of enrolling in courses that would allow us to explore our creative sides. One morning, Sarah suggested we sign up for a pottery class. Imagine the mess we'll make. It could be a disaster, but a fun one, she nudged, her enthusiasm infectious. I hesitated at first, intimidated by the idea of molding clay, then remembered my newfound mantra about balance. Why not? I said, surprising myself with my own eagerness, and we soon found ourselves with our names on a list beside a host of other brave souls willing to wrestle with their artistic limitations. The class turned out to be one of the most rewarding experiences. We fumbled, laughed, and accidentally flung handfuls of clay at each other. The instructor, a warm woman named Linda, guided us patiently, her laughter ringing through the studio as our creations often morphed into something unrecognizable. Yet, with each failed attempt, I felt my heart loosen, the tension of needing to excel slipping away with every imperfect pot or crooked vase we shaped. It was liberating in a way I'd never expected, the act of creating becoming a therapy session and a celebration of our flaws and companionship. After one particularly absurd class where we mistakenly mixed red and green clay, resulting in an unpleasant shade that resembled an unappetizing stew, Sarah turned to me, her hands covered in a mixture of colors, and said, "Look at that. We just became abstract artists." As weeks passed, we also found ourselves exploring goods at local flea markets, capturing moments with our phone cameras, and building an impromptu scrapbook of our debauchery, filled with ripped ticket stubs, photographs of us making exaggerated silly faces, or random notes we jotted down purely for laughter's sake. One evening, while flipping through our new book of misadventures beneath the glow of fairy lights on Sarah's balcony, a wave of pure gratitude washed over me. I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come from being trapped in the rigid expectations I'd once believed I had to follow. It was as if I had been carrying a heavy backpack filled with old ideas and rules about how life should be lived, and each experience with Sarah helped me to shed a few more pounds until I felt free to walk my own path. But just as I began to feel I had everything figured out, life threw a curveball. One night, after a lovely dinner where we feasted on Thai takeout and laughed until our cheeks were sore, Sarah suddenly grew quiet. I noticed her staring at her phone, her brow furrowed and lips pressed into a thin line. "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked, concern threading through my voice. She glanced up, trying to muster a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's my mom," she said softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "She's going through a rough patch. I think she might need me." My heart sank at the thought of her leaving, the thought of losing what we had begun to build together in this journey of balance and creativity. In that moment, I felt a familiar knot of uncertainty tighten my chest again. "How long are you thinking of going?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know. A week maybe? She just sounds really overwhelmed and I feel like I should be there." As she spoke, I could see the conflict written all over her face, her desire to support her family clashing with the joy she had found in our friendship. I felt a pang of selfishness at the very thought of her needing to leave. How could I remind her of the beautiful balance we had created if I was only thinking of myself? So, I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers in a brief moment of solidarity. "Sarah, you have to go. Family comes first, and I would never want to hold you back from that." We both sat in silence for a moment, holding on to each other, and I assured her, "I'll be right here when you come back. We can pick up where we left off." She nodded, a smile breaking through her sadness, but I could detect a hint of guilt in her eyes. I didn't want my own fears to dim the light of her compassion, so I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as memories of our laughter filled the air around us. In that embrace, there was an understanding. She needed to care for her mother, and I needed to let her go, at least for a little while. That night, as sleep washed over me, I wrestled with conflicting emotions, but I took comfort in the thought that we were both on our own journeys toward the elusive balance we sought. In the following weeks, Sarah was often across the phone screen, sharing snippets of her time with family, moments punctuated with laughter, but also clouded by a piercing worry. I kept up with our pottery class, crafting lopsided creatures that always brought me back to her and her infectious laughter. Each day felt like an exercise in patience, but I focused instead on immersing myself in my own creations, slowly learning that empty time not spent with friends could still be filled with purpose. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity but was merely a month, the day arrived when Sarah called, her voice ringing bright and clear on the other end. "I'm back. And I've missed you like crazy," she exclaimed, an effervescence that rivaled the bubbles in the soda I was currently sipping. We scheduled a reunion filled with stories and laughter over our favorite meals, but more importantly, it became an opportunity for both of us to share our growth during our time apart. As we settled on her balcony, our familiar space, I was overcome with a sense of completeness. As she spoke about her experiences with her mother, I realized that the meaning behind those quirky expressions we often laughed about had shifted yet again. Life was about embracing the chaos, the uncertainties, and the joy that comes from simply being present with each other, much like our beautiful messes in pottery class. And as the sun set, casting a warm golden hue over our playful surroundings, I felt not only the sensation of our connection rekindling but the understanding that balance didn't mean never being apart, it meant knowing we both could carry our journeys and support each other all the same. Looking back, I'd find it easy to chuckle at the foolishness of sayings that once perplexed me. Having our cake and eating it too, became a cherished memory of sweet times shared, both together and apart. And as I lay my head down to sleep that night, the warmth of reconnection enveloped me like a soft blanket, reminding me that the true essence of balance was found not in the rigid chapters we penned but rather in the laughter, the love, and the art of simply being. In the weeks that followed, I found myself tackling each day with a renewed spirit, a vibrant sense of possibility filling the corners of my mind that had once been dimmed by the weight of expectations. Amelia and I dived into spontaneous adventures, our schedules freeing up in ways I had never thought possible. One weekend, we hopped into her old hatchback, the jazz music pulsating through the speakers, the air thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers as we drove toward the mountains. We ventured off the beaten path, often leaving our plans in the dust, reveling in the act of simply exploring. I remember one particularly magical afternoon when we stumbled across a hidden waterfall. Its waters glimmered like diamonds in the sunlight, and as we stood there, the roar of the falls cascading down drowned out the noise of the outside world, leaving only the sound of our laughter echoing around us. I found the purest joy in those moments, a kind of euphoria that made the silly saying, the one I had initially brushed off as nonsense, now feel like a charming puzzle I wanted to solve. Every time we indulged in a piece of cake, whether it was a slice from a charming coffee shop or the store-bought kind savored after an exhausting trek, it came wrapped in laughter, sweetening our wouldn't have been happy about it days. Yet amidst the joy was a quiet understanding that our journeys were not without their challenges. Each of our individual paths had begun to twist and turn, bringing unexpected obstacles even as they interwove now with shared dreams. As the leaves began to change with the approach of fall, a hint of worry settled in my stomach, neutralizing the sweetness of those carefree days with a pinch of salt. I felt a growing pressure about the decisions looming ahead, my career trajectory, my financial goals, the desire to move forward while also nurturing the beautiful bond we had started to build. One evening, as we sat by the fire at her family's cabin, I let those thoughts spill out, almost reluctantly. Does it ever feel like we're on a tightrope, swinging back and forth with so many expectations? I asked, watching the flames flicker and dance. The crackling would wrap around my voice, giving it a moment to linger in the air. Amelia paused, her marshmallow on a stick hovering over the embers. Oh, totally, she chuckled, but there was an edge of seriousness behind her laughter. You feel like you can only take one step before something gives? She continued, her expression thoughtful, but vibrant with understanding. Her candidness made it easier for me to articulate the knots I had been tying in my chest. I don't want to let go of these moments with you, but I also don't want to be chasing after shadows when there's a whole sun rising over here, I confessed, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her deep-set brown eyes. Somehow, my heart felt lighter after sharing, almost as if exposing those fears to the open air could diffuse their weight. She reached for my hand, a firm squeeze that reminded me we were in this together, even if the answers remained fuzzy. Maybe balance doesn't mean splitting everything in half, she proposed, a smile breaking through the seriousness that filled our exchange. What if we don't chase some imaginary ideal? We embrace this mess of emotions and decisions. As she spoke, I felt the tension ease, the warmth of her words curling around my heart like the smoke swirling above us. We settled into a comfortable silence, the only sounds being the crackling fire and the occasional pop of the wood, sensations that felt grounding amidst the shifting sands of our thoughts. They say it takes time to grasp the meaning behind common sayings, but in this moment, I understood that finding balance didn't require perfection. It simply needed honesty, understanding, and the willingness to reshape the narrative. Weeks turned into months, and together, we picked through the chaos, sometimes stumbling, but more often laughing, the echo of our carefree adventures merging with the sounds of life ahead. The holidays approached, and with them, Discussions about where we might go next and how we could create lasting memories together. One evening, as snowflakes blanketed our town, I made a cake, our favorite recipe, as a way to toast to where we were and where we might go. The scent of vanilla woven with cinnamon filled her kitchen, wrapping us in warmth while echoing with nostalgic laughter from our past. As we enjoyed that cake, rich and decadent, it hit me how much I had grown. In my urge to find clarity, I had found companionship and the beauty of shared experience. I had learned to savor not only the sweet moments but also to embrace the complexities of life that often trailed behind, understanding that even in chaos, there could be joy. And it was in that kitchen, laughing over crumbs and crumbs of conversations, that I realized this journey was as much about cultivating joy in the mundane moments as it was about making big plans for the future. Months later, and as I sit here now reminiscing on those days, I have a sweet piece of knowledge tucked away in my heart. It isn't just about having our cake. It's about finding the right people with whom to share it, making sense of the nonsense together, crafting our own meanings, and knowing that in our laughter and shared experiences, we were crafting a life that looked unexpectedly beautiful. And so, with the summer sun peeking through my window and the birds chirping in delight, I take a deep breath, ready for the chapters that lay ahead. Blissfully unaware of the surprises they might hold, I had always been the kind of person who thrived on routine. I woke up every weekday at the same time, enjoyed a cup of coffee while watching the sun rise, and headed to my job as a project manager at a small tech firm. It was steady, predictable, and frankly, comforting. But recently, I found myself on the brink of a significant change. I was about to start my paternity leave. The irony was that I had no child to take leave for. Instead, I had conjured up an elaborate story about impending fatherhood, a tale that began innocently enough but spiraled way beyond my control. You see, I wasn't exactly the confident social butterfly my colleagues believed me to be. I was a 30-something man living alone, with a life filled mostly with work and the solitude of my small apartment. I had always admired the family-oriented lives of my teammates, where evening conversations revolved around children's milestones and playful anecdotes. It seeped into my consciousness, nudging me to share a piece of my future that, while imaginative, didn't actually exist. At a recent office gathering, surrounded by the usual jovial jokes and chatter, I casually dropped the mention of my soon-to-arrive baby. What I intended as a throwaway line turned into a surge of interest and excitement as well-wishers insisted I share updates. The concerning part was that, when I felt compelled to clarify that this was real, I could have easily admitted the truth. Instead, something inside me, a mix of fear and the thrill of being part of something bigger than myself, kept me weaving lies about an unseen little one. I concocted an elaborate backstory, detailing the complex logistics that my partner and I navigated, crafting a perfect facade with every conversation. Yet, as the days passed, the weight of my deception grew unbearable, punctuated by questioning colleagues who eagerly looked forward to my impending fatherhood. Days turned into weeks, and to my horror, paternity leave became more than just a nice gesture from HR, it transformed into a looming obligation. I couldn't face the idea of returning to work after a month and having to explain the absence of a child. What if they expected baby pictures? What if they wanted to meet my partner, the co-parent whose existence I had fabricated? Panic had begun to creep in, fueled by guilt and anxiety. I spent sleepless nights picturing my colleagues' reactions when they discovered that not only was I not becoming a father, but also that I had spun this elaborate tale just to feel included in conversations. I often caught myself staring at the empty nursery I had started to imagine, filled with toys I planned to pick up during my sporadic trips to the store, never bought, never needed. The moment weighed heavily on me. I rode the bus home one evening, feeling a bitter mixture of shame and sadness. Did I really need to create this barrier between me and my colleagues? The truths of my mundane life began to gnaw at me, how I yearned to be one of them, sharing heartfelt parenting tales instead of fading into the background. And just when I thought I might crumble under the pressure of my elaborate deception, something unexpected happened. I overheard a chat at work, two colleagues discussing their own struggles with parenthood. Suddenly, there it was, the relief in knowing that they were facing their own hurdles and not living the seemingly perfect lives I had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, everyone had their battles. That idea sparked a faint glimmer of hope. I finally mustered the courage to confront my lie. The next day, I gathered my closest teammates and, with pounding heart and shaky hands, admitted the truth. I spoke openly about my outrageous tale and laid bare my insecurities. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then laughter erupted, not at my expense, but in solidarity. They shared their own moments of pretending, their struggles with feelings of inadequacy, And suddenly, I felt a weight lift. The fears I thought would alienate me had instead connected me deeper to each of them. Now, here I was on the eve of my supposed paternity leave, without a child but with something much more valuable, a newfound connection and understanding that we all have our unique stories, often woven with threads of self-doubt and longing for belonging. As I prepared to walk into this new chapter of life, I took a deep breath, relieved that, although there might not be a crib to put together, I had certain friends who would share their paths to parenthood with me, and who would support me through my next adventure, whatever that may be. Update: a few weeks after that confession, I received an unexpected surprise. One of my colleagues reached out to me, suggesting we should start a support group for those of us navigating the complexities of adulthood, parenting or not. It felt surreal, and for the first time, I was excited to step outside my routine and forge genuine connections. Helping each other through our different life challenges became a new adventure, turning my fabricated narrative into a meaningful community of shared experiences and understanding. I often reflect on that moment when I faced my truth and how it unfolded into something I never expected, a connection that not only relieved my guilt but also led me into a richer, more fulfilling chapter of life. It was a Friday evening, the kind of evening that drapes the world in a soft, hazy light as day surrenders to dusk. I sat at my kitchen table, swirling a spoon around in an almost empty mug of lukewarm coffee while lost in thought, my mind still buzzing from the recent support group meeting we'd organized. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Instead, there was a shared authenticity in the room, a collective understanding that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The people in that small gathering ranged from new parents overwhelmed by their responsibilities to those not yet ready to embrace the title of adult. Each person brought their own struggles, stories that intertwined in unexpected ways, making me realize no one was truly alone in their fears and uncertainties. I recalled how Janet, a single mother, had shared her battles with anxiety, and Timmy, who was still figuring out college, spoke up about the suffocating pressure to succeed. Each story was a reminder of the fragility and complexity of adulthood, and I found myself nodding along, feeling both their pain and their courage. As the weeks progressed, our group blossomed. What began as a mere flicker of understanding ignited into a vibrant community that met every Thursday evening. Laughter echoed through my living room, mixed with vulnerable confessions and supportive nods. It was heartwarming, and I relished in the sense of community we cultivated. The guilt around my fabricated narrative of impending fatherhood ebbed away, replaced by a profound realization that we were all figuring life out together, and that really, we were all a little lost. I often caught myself smiling during those evenings, and the sound of voices filled with warmth and humor became my favorite backdrop. But I was faced with a new dilemma one night as I was putting together snacks before our meeting. I received a call from my younger sister, Amanda, who had just returned home from a whirlwind trip to Europe. Her excitement was palpable through the phone, but it wasn't long before she veered into more serious territory. Amid her stories about the Eiffel Tower and canals of Venice, she mentioned how she was finally ready to settle down, to talk about the next step in her life, which obviously involved starting a family. The weight of that conversation pressed down on my chest like a heavy stone. I felt a pang of panic surge, the reality of my deception gnawed at my insides. What would she think if she ever found out that I had concocted a tale of impending fatherhood to avoid the pressures surrounding my life choices, especially now that she was ready to embrace that path? Would it all unravel? In a moment of desperation, I decided to confide in Amanda during a quiet moment, carefully weighing my words. I hoped that within my revelation, she would find the humor or lightness to soften the blow. You know, I've been on this wild journey where I've pretended to be something I didn't think I could handle, I began, and she listened intently, her laughter easing the tension in my heart. I told her how raising a child had allowed me to see my own struggles through a different lens, paving the way for connections I never thought I'd cultivate. To my surprise, Amanda found my crafted story amusing and insightful rather than shocking. "It sounds like you're navigating adulthood better than most," she chuckled, "and isn't that what we're all doing anyway? Faking it until we make it?" Her lightheartedness released the tight grasp of anxiety I had been holding on to, and we spent the rest of the evening discussing our dreams and aspirations, not anchored solely on parenthood but rather on the broader realities of life, a tapestry woven with threads of hope, uncertainty, and laughter. With Amanda's unwavering support, I felt a new sense of freedom wash over me, a relief that perhaps my little charade wasn't a shameful secret but rather just one of the many ways we discover our authentic selves through vulnerability. Reflecting on the friendships I had formed, I realized that this journey was less about the lies I had spun and more about the beautiful truths that emerged from them. As I settled into bed later that night, I considered how liberating it felt to embrace honesty not only with others but with myself. No longer would I anchor my identity in fear or pretense. Instead, I would step boldly into the unknown with all its imperfections. And just like that, my life felt whole again, accepting the beauty and chaos in every chapter, connected by the threads of shared humanity. Update: it's been a few months since that conversation with Amanda. Lifelong friendships have flourished, and I've taken an active role in advocating for mental health awareness in our community, inspired by the stories shared in our group. The fear of being exposed as a fake parent is now a distant memory. The narrative I once felt burdened by has transformed into a beacon for others seeking solace in their struggles. This experience opened doors and paved paths for authenticity in my relationships. I've even started volunteering at local youth centers, hoping to share the lessons I've learned in this winding road of adulthood. As for Amanda, she's expecting. Turns out, my penchant for fabricated stories led me and my sister into a new reality, one that's filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine connection. Who knew that embracing the truth about myself could blossom into such sincerities? Life is certainly unpredictable, but I've never felt more ready to embrace it. In the months since I admitted the truth to myself and to Amanda, I've felt an overwhelming sense of purpose settle into my daily life. The support group I started has grown beyond what I originally envisioned. It's become a source of strength not just for me, but for several others who share similar stories of struggle, miscommunication, and the fear of falling short in adulthood. Each meeting feels like a gathering of old friends, people from different walks of life, yet united by a common thread of searching for authenticity in a world that sometimes feels disingenuous. We sit in a cozy circle at the community center, armed with coffee cups that warm our hands and hearts, inviting the soft glow of shared vulnerability. I've learned to listen more than I speak, letting others express their frustrations and triumphs as they navigate the chaotic waters of adult responsibilities and expectations. Amanda's pregnancy has added a delightful twist to it all. The excitement radiating from her is infectious. We often discuss nursery themes and baby names during our group, blurring the lines between support and friendship. It's as though the universe conspired to deepen my connections with those around me, threading their lives into my own, and I've found beauty in the unpredictable nature of it all. I marvel at how life was once about spinning stories and creating facades, and now it is vibrant, full of real conversations and shared laughter. We've even started planning community events, like game nights and potlucks, where each of us can bring something to share: food, tales, laughter, or simply our presence. I remember the palpable tension I felt when I first confessed my lies about impending fatherhood. It was an avalanche of fear and isolation. Yet, here I am, surrounded by people who celebrate honesty in its many forms. We all have our burdens, and together, we lift them slightly, making them easier to carry. One evening, during one of our meetings, a new member shared that they had spent years crafting a seemingly perfect life on social media, only to feel a gnawing emptiness. As she spoke, I could see her raw vulnerability spark something in the others, each person resonating with her words as if they were echoes of their own hidden truths. It struck me then that our meetings had transformed into a sanctuary where we could strip away our facades and embrace our authentic selves, imperfections and all. It was a revelation for many of us, realizing that the messiness of life is actually what makes it beautiful. Soon, I found myself reflecting on my past choices, letting go of the guilt that once anchored me. The lies I told to dodge the harshness of reality had morphed into a transformative pathway, leading me to self-discovery and clarity. I attended workshops on mindfulness, delving into journaling practices, and even explored meditation, learning how to center myself amidst life's storms. It felt surreal to wake up each day, not dreading the mundane, but eagerly anticipating the lessons each moment could present. As Amanda's due date drew nearer, we laughed and planned, aware of the whirlwind to come, but profoundly grateful for the community we had forged amidst the chaos. I often found myself thinking about how life led me here, to this extraordinary confluence of honesty, responsibility, and connection, not despite my earlier fabrications, but because of them. Each day was less about the anxiety of adulthood, and more about celebrating each small victory and communal joy. As I knelt in the nursery one afternoon, painting the walls soft pastel colors, I couldn't help but feel that life's unpredictable nature was not a hindrance, but rather a tapestry allowing us to weave our shared experiences into something greater. I looked forward to welcoming Amanda's baby into a world filled with love, laughter, and honest engagement. As the figure of a new life loomed near, I recognized that my journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of a newfound adventure, one where every unscripted moment would reveal the beauty and authenticity. And though the unexpected twists and turns would remain part of my life, I now embrace them with a heart ready for what might come next. Confession: I paid my way through college coursework, and now I'm going to graduate with a degree that I did not earn, but rather bought piece by piece. I know how it sounds: flippant, irresponsible, but let me explain before you judge. It all began in my sophomore year when the pressure of maintaining my scholarships while balancing a part-time job became almost unbearable. I was overwhelmed, drowning in courses that felt designed to torment rather than educate. My friends were either excelling effortlessly or struggling gloriously, and I found myself in a dark space of melancholy detachment. One evening, after a particularly intense round of studying that included multiple energy drinks and little sleep, I stumbled upon an online community that offered a service, purchasing coursework and final exams outright. The first transaction felt like a slippery slope, the kind that promises a temporary fix for long-term consequences. Justifying that act of desperation became easy: after all, wouldn't I be earning the degree by paying towards my future? I convinced myself that everyone was cheating in one form or another, they just didn't have the boldness to embrace it quite like I did. As each semester passed, I found myself sinking deeper into a quicksand of deception, carefully crafting excuses for my absence from study sessions and over-exaggerating my partial understanding of the subjects. My friends often praised me for my dedicated work ethic, and although their words would sting momentarily with guilt, I brushed them aside, whispering to myself that I was only finding a shortcut to a frustrating destination. But there lay the essence of my conflict. There were moments, late at night, when the weight of my choices pressed down like a seal, prompting haunting questions. Was I a fraud? Would I deserve to step on the stage come graduation? I could already hear my family cheering, my mother's proud smile lighting up the auditorium, unaware of the disingenuous piece of paper I was holding onto so tightly. Everything kept shifting and fracturing within me like glass breaking silently in a forgotten corner, beautiful yet destructive. As graduation approached, the ache of my concealment gnawed beneath my skin. I was a ticking time bomb, a secret kept far too long, and it felt like the walls were closing in, threatening to expose me at any moment. Then, one day while lurching through the cafeteria, a friend pulled me aside. She had suspected something was amiss, and the look on her face struck a match to my carefully constructed facade. Confessing to her felt like actually letting the air out of a balloon. Her response was one I hadn't anticipated. Rather than anger, she offered empathy, admitting that the academic landscape often forced students into corners they had to navigate through dodgy strategies like mine. That moment shifted everything for me. It wasn't about whether what I had done was right or wrong, but rather about understanding the depth of the pressure we all faced. As graduation day arrived, I stood among my fellow students, donning my cap and gown, feeling simultaneously high on adrenaline and low with self-doubt. And when my name was called, I felt something shatter in me, the part that thought I could outsmart the world. I walked across that stage, a degree in hand, yes, one bought with a hefty price tag rather than blood, sweat, and tears. The applause echoed around me like distant thunder, and in that moment, I realized I had betrayed my journey, but as I met my family's expectations, the simple joy of their pride began to override the complexity of my feelings. Afterward, I stepped outside, almost dazed by the weightiness of it all, when a thought flared to life in my mind: this was just the beginning. I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth forever. It was time for some honesty. Perhaps I would share my clandestine story in a more private setting, with those who really mattered, and in that telling, I would find healing. I couldn't change the past, but I could redefine my future. Maybe my experience would even serve as a lesson on authenticity, connection, and the very real pressures of society. Update: several months later, I did reach out to my friend who had supported me back at graduation, along with a few close acquaintances. Over coffee, I laid everything bare, and to my surprise, they responded not with judgment but rather with understanding. It sparked conversations about our experiences and the struggles many face in our generation regarding societal expectations and the pressure to succeed at any cost. Writing this out, sharing my truth, it felt liberating, and together we began to create a group focusing on academic honesty and support, helping others navigate their own paths with integrity. Now, as I look toward the future, I hold my degree not just as a symbol of achievement, but as a reminder that it's not always the path we take that defines us, but the honesty we must eventually embrace along the way. I can still visualize that summer afternoon when my friends and I held our first meeting. Inside the small campus coffee shop, sunlight poured in through the big windows, illuminating our makeshift meeting space, which consisted of mismatched chairs and tables pushed together. The aroma of roasted beans filled the air, creating a sense of warmth, much like the conversations we began to share. In one corner, I could see Sarah, nervously twirling her hair, finally breaking her silence to share her own struggles, how she felt the weight of her family's expectations resting heavily on her shoulders. It was a familiar feeling. I had been there, too, buried under pressure and guilt, trying to juggle classes, a part-time job, and an insatiable desire to please everyone around me. Our little group blossomed into a safe haven, where confessions were freely exchanged like whispers of wind passing through the trees. Before long, we were venturing beyond just our academic honesty initiative. We organized events that fostered a sense of community, bringing together individuals who felt overwhelmed and out of place in the finicky world of higher education. We laughed more than I ever thought possible, exchanging stories of late-night study sessions fueled by caffeine and the ridiculousness of your classic imposter syndrome. There was something profound about vulnerability. When you openly admit your flaws and fears to others, it transforms those burdens into shared experiences, which somehow lightens the load. I started attending workshops on ethics and academic integrity, learning more about the real impact of decisions I used to brush aside. There was a powerful moment during one of those discussions when I finally understood the gravity of my actions. I stood there, listening to another student practically in tears, talking about how he felt he was not worthy of being in college because he struggled to keep up, how he had resorted to cheating just to stay afloat. I felt guilty, a wave of remorse washing over me, and I wondered how many people like him had slipped through the cracks, feeling alone in their academic journey. It prompted me to speak openly about my own choices, to share the truth that had slowly unraveled my conscience. As I spoke, I saw the surprise mingled with relief in the eyes of those around me. It was as if I had peeled back the layers of shame that had wrapped tightly around us all. This cathartic release sparked discussions about what it truly means to earn your education and how, at the heart of it, is the understanding that everyone is fighting their own battles in silence. The irony was not lost on me. While I had paid my way through college, the real education came from facing my fears and flaws head-on. As the semester drew to a close, I prepared for graduation, standing in front of the mirror, my cap and gown draping elegantly over the shoulders of someone who had finally found a measure of peace. My heart, once heavy with deceit, was now lightened by compassion and understanding, not just for myself, but for the countless faces I had come to know and love through our group. As I received my diploma, I didn't just see the degree. Instead, I perceived it as a token of survival, a reminder of how far I've come. In that moment, it was evident that integrity mattered far more than mere achievements on paper. I left the auditorium, my heart buoyant, my soul ready to forge a new path, one constructed on the foundation of honesty and camaraderie. I was stepping into the world, prepared not just to be a graduate but to advocate for others, to encourage them that honesty isn't just a buzzword but a guiding principle. And under the stars that night, sharing laughter with friends who had become family, I felt a profound sense of belonging, a richness of experience that far surpassed any degree. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I embraced the knowledge that while I may have struggled, I was now equipped with the tools to help others navigate their own intricate labyrinths. Reflecting back, I realized that my so-called failure became my greatest privilege, an opportunity to redefine success on my own terms and perhaps sow the seeds of authenticity in the lives of others around me. With that warm feeling of belonging wrapping around me like a blanket, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I've come. The journey from a hollow accomplishment to a deeply personal understanding of integrity had changed the contours of my life in ways I had never anticipated. As the conversation turned to lighter topics and our laughter echoed into the night, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. This was more than just a graduation party, it was a celebration of truth and acceptance. There's something about being on the brink of a new chapter that fills you with excitement, yet also with a slight twinge of anxiety. Yes, I was graduating, but this meant stepping into a world outside the university's protective walls, where the complexities of adulthood would lay themselves bare. That summer, my friends and I busied ourselves with dreams and practicalities, each of us contemplating what lay ahead. I found solace in writing, each word pouring onto the page as a cathartic release. I chronicled my experiences, not just out of a desire to express myself, but with the hope of crafting a guide that could resonate with others who faced similar dilemmas, the pressure to succeed, the fears of inadequacy, and the daunting shadows of society's expectations. I spent evenings sipping coffee in cozy cafes, hazy lamplight illuminating the pages of my journal as I poured my thoughts onto paper, detailing not just my journey but also the voices of fellow students I had spoken with about their own struggles. In doing so, I connected with those who had grappled with cheating, anxiety, or the fear of disappointing their families. It was through these candid stories that I started to see a pattern. Many of us felt lost in a sea of comparison, our worth often tethered to numerical grades and hollow accolades. I realized that my own story had the potential to shed light on the darker corners of academic life that weren't often highlighted. Instead of seeking validation through a conventional path, I began to embrace the idea that each one of us has our own unique narrative that adds depth to the collective experience. As the season turned, and graduation approached, I stood at the threshold of not just a ceremony but a pivotal moment of self-discovery. With my friends rallying around me, we decided to establish a real space on campus for honest dialogue, an initiative to create a safe haven for students struggling with the weight of unreal expectations. We entitled it Unwritten Paths, a name that encapsulated the myriad ways we could navigate life with integrity, well-being, and authenticity. Each week, students would gather to share their stories, brainstorm ideas, and offer support, knowing that they were part of a community that championed personal truths over societal pressures. Finally, graduation day arrived, a technicolor whirlwind of pride, nerves, and overwhelming emotion. Standing in line, clad in my cap and gown, I felt every heartbeat echoing my anticipation. When they called my name, I stepped forward, my friends cheering wildly from the sidelines. As I held the diploma in my hands, I wasn't just thinking about the hours of study, the sleepless nights, or the money spent. Instead, I felt an overwhelming gratitude for the lessons learned along the way. Those lessons had come not just from textbooks and lectures but from grappling with my sincerity and, in turn, learning to embrace the authenticity of others. As I scanned the crowd, I found my closest friends, people who understood me, who celebrated me not for my grades, but for my journey, and my heart swelled with joy. We gathered later, recounting the day's events, our laughter bright against the evening sky. In that moment, I recognized something profound. While the future felt as uncharted as a blank page, I was ready to tackle it with an open heart, armed with empathy and resilience. And then, as if life had its own script, I received a message from my old college professor, the one who had challenged me to think beyond the traditional definitions of success. He invited me to share my journey and the impact of our community initiative at an upcoming panel on academic integrity. Nervously, I accepted. It felt surreal to think that my story could inspire a broader conversation. As I prepared to step into a space surrounded by academics and thought leaders, I took a moment to breathe and center myself, reflecting on the days of fear and self-doubt, knowing full well that I was embarking on yet another chapter, one where I could truly weave my experiences into a narrative that might change someone's life for the better. In sharing my voice, in being open about my flaws and triumphs, I was no longer just someone who paid her way through college. I was a living testament to the power of transformation, honesty, and compassion. With every word I spoke, I hoped to inspire others not to hide behind their carefully constructed facades but to embrace their journeys, however messy or unconventional they might be. As I continued to navigate my path in this dynamic world, I realized that the degree I hadn't truly earned was merely a stepping stone towards something far more significant, a shared vision for a future where integrity and authenticity reigned supreme. It all began with a simple email that landed in my inbox on a dreary Wednesday morning. The subject line read payroll, important update, and in a moment of both dread and curiosity, I clicked it open. You see, I've never been the kind of person to make a fuss. I work quietly as an accounting clerk in a mid-size firm, diligently toiling away for a paycheck that barely helped me keep my head above water. I'm a 28-year-old woman navigating the world with a tinge of anxiety and a lifelong struggle to pay bills on time, all while wrestling with the looming shadow of student loans that felt more like a hungry beast than an obligation. The email explained that they were implementing a new payroll system, and while I barely glanced at the details, I noticed a mention of bonus adjustments and temporary increases which piqued my interest. I hadn't thought much of it until the following Friday when my paycheck arrived, and reality hit me like a tidal wave. My eyes skimmed over the digits displayed in my online banking app until they came to a complete stop, staring in disbelief. I was overpaid, by a lot. The total was 5 times my usual paycheck, and a wave of excitement washed over me so instantaneously that I found it hard to breathe. Was it a mistake? A windfall? I rushed to my laptop, retracing my steps through the payroll system, but everything seemed to check out. After skimming through the company's online manual on payroll adjustments, I was relieved to find that they had mentioned this would happen. However, the ramifications of keeping this money loomed over my head like an anxious cloud. For the first few days, I couldn't deter the bliss that came with being suddenly affluent. I treated myself to my favorite meals, replaced my sorely lacking wardrobe with outfits that made me feel like a new woman, and even allowed myself a weekend trip to a quaint little cabin by the lakeside where I could finally breathe away from my work. Each indulgence felt bittersweet, a thrilling escape from my grind, tempered with guilt for indulging in what felt like ill-gotten gains. As the weeks passed, I wondered how long I could keep this up. Each paycheck became a new thrill in the world of possibilities. I cleaned my apartment, nurtured plants that previously hung on the brink of life, and took my friends out for drinks that ended with uproarious laughter echoing against the bar walls, their expressions of glee making every decision feel justified. But clouds of dread hovered closely nearby. Thoughts of consequence gnawed at my insides during the quiet moments at night, where I lay restless, the weight of the secret driving a wedge between my high spirits and reality. I convinced myself I had no choice but to keep the facade, that it was too risky to report the glitch. After all, I had never even stepped foot into the town hall of corporate policy. I was there to do my job, not to interpret the rules. All it would take was one slip, one whispered word about my newfound fortune, and I could find myself not only out of a job but embroiled in a terrible situation that I wasn't prepared to navigate. Months passed, I found myself submerged in this intricate web of deceit, mingling pleasure with a hefty splash of paranoia. The anxiety thickened each time payroll day came around, and the thought lingered, gnawing at my thoughts like a mouse in the night. I could feel the ultimatum building, bringing the reality crashing down until one afternoon while sitting at my desk, I was blindsided by an urgent email marked important notice which sent my heart racing. It was a request from HR, calling a company-wide meeting to discuss payroll discrepancies. The words swirled around in my mind like confetti thrown into the air before crashing to the ground as a harsh truth settled in. They knew. They must have confirmed the miscalculations, ran their audits, and deduced I was likely involved. My stomach churned, and I felt the icy grip of despair tighten around my chest. The realization hit me hard. I had grown so used to my false safety blanket of extra funds that I couldn't even begin to imagine relinquishing them now, the very thought terrifying me into frozen paralysis. The day of the meeting arrived with a clarity that I wished I could escape. Standing in front of my colleagues, I felt like an imposter, bound by the walls of my own constructed greed. The HR manager explained the error and expressed their process for rectification, but a strange anticipation filled the room, as eyes darted back to my direction. I wrestled with my emotions, staring down at my clasped hands, feeling that if I let my tongue slip, it would only shatter the already delicate stage we stood upon. In a moment that needed no hesitation, perhaps spurred on by the weight of my debts and my guilt, I decided to come clean. I raised my hand, my voice breaking through a silence that shrouded the department. I think I might have been one of those overpaid. As the murmurs filled the room, I could sense curiosity mixed with disbelief. The HR manager nodded thoughtfully, calling me up in a tone that indicated more than just professional grace. In that instant, an invisible burden lifted off my shoulders, a relief I hadn't known I was seeking. The interview that followed was surprisingly gentle. They asked me questions, assured me things would be sorted, and even nodded when I expressed my genuine confusion about how it all happened. My honesty seemed to be met with kindness, rather than scorn. Days later, after tension smoothed out and the firm welcomed a collective sigh of temporary relief, I found myself hesitantly optimistic. The company worked with me, allowing me to pay back the overpaid balance in manageable deductions taken directly from my subsequent checks. The relief flooded my spirit like the spring rains after a long winter, and in tandem with the trust I'd gained back with my coworkers, I felt grounded. As a quiet reflection, I'd learned a plethora of life lessons in those months, about honesty, about the currency of trust, and about genuinely valuing what I already had. And as for the meeting that had once infused dread into my veins, it turned out to be the turning point where I could not only salvage my job but craft deeper relationships within my workplace. Now, as I close my eyes at night, the weight of secret remorse has settled onto soft pillows of new beginnings, and I find that the true bounty of unexpected fortune lies not in dollars, but in the peace of being was wholly true. Looking back, it wasn't only about the glitch, it was a lesson on what happens when you find yourself standing at the crossroads of opportunity and ethical discovery. If I had a chance to offer anyone a piece of advice, it would be this: sometimes, the hardest confessions yield the sweetest outcomes, tethered to authenticity, which, much like a deep breath, can release the most burdensome of weights. Update: a few months later, after I'd regained my balance at work and developed friends with my colleagues through concrete illusions of trust, I received an unexpected email from my HR manager. Their words acknowledged my honesty and an unanticipated promotion due in part to the integrity I displayed. Life never ceases to entertain a curveball, and this new opportunity was one that I humbly accepted, smiling at the gentle lesson wrapped inside the embrace of everyday existence. When I first read the email from my HR manager, a strange mix of disbelief and elation coursed through me. The promotion was more than just a title bump, it came with a salary increase that, while not nearly as outrageous as the one I had accidentally benefited from during that glitch, was significant enough to make my heart race with possibilities. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed out my response, gratitude spilling from my thoughts onto the screen in a flurry of acknowledgments and excitement. Yet, there was a twinge of unease nestled within my heart, a soft reminder that while I had experienced fortuitous fortune, my colleagues were still working tirelessly, unaware of the inner transitions I'd undergone. When I walked into the office that Monday morning, my usual routine was invigorated by the prospect of my new responsibilities. The air felt charged, almost electric, but with every friendly smile exchanged and casual conversation I engaged in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I owed my team a deeper layer of transparency. The last few months had shaped me tremendously. Honest conversations about ethics and accountability had sparked friendships among my peers. I found myself reveling in camaraderie and shared laughter, the kind that stitched together hearts and minds in a workplace filled with mundane tasks and the occasional coffee break chatter. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, guilt lingered like a shadow. Could I truly relish this achievement, knowing how it grew from a moment of chaos and moral ambiguity? As the morning faded, I huddled in a conference room for our monthly team meeting, where I listened to my colleagues discuss their struggles, their victories, and everything in between. Their drive inspired me, and as my new role would place me in a position to support them more directly, I felt the need to share my journey, the good, the bad, and the ugly, with the team. At the end of the meeting, as the group wrapped up with a round of thanks and recognition, I cleared my throat, the hesitant silence punctuated by the shifting in chairs. "Hey, everyone," I began, voice slightly wavering. "Before we leave, I wanted to share something with you all. It seems a bit weird maybe, but I think you deserve to know a part of my journey here." The room turned attentive, curiosity swirling in their eyes, and I began to recount my experience with the payroll glitch, the guilt, my honesty, and how it led to my unexpected promotion. I explored my emotions, the fears of judgment battling with my desire to connect and be truthful. When I finished, the room fell silent for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, but then, one by one, I saw smiles and nods bloom among my colleagues. "Wow, that's brave of you to share," one of them said, their voice warm and inviting. "We appreciate the transparency. It's refreshing." Another chimed in, and soon voices were mingling in a tapestry of support, stories shared, and laughter at the absurdity of life's twists. Through that candid moment, I felt the weight of my earlier guilt lifted, replaced by a profound connection that tethered us together in the shared unpredictability of our paths. The weeks that followed were punctuated by collaborative projects and an exhilarating sense of unity. I became dedicated not only to performing my new duties well but also to creating an environment where honesty was celebrated and shared burdens were lightened. The team flourished, nurturing creativity and innovation. I could finally say I didn't just have a job, I had a family, a tapestry of stories woven together by trust. Reflecting on that period, I savored lessons stitched into my daily actions and interactions around the water cooler gossip and shared lunches. Life truly is a series of beautiful confessions leading to unexpected gifts. Just when I thought I'd hit my peak, I learned the true value is in the relationships we cultivate, tinted with authenticity, humility, and a sense of humor that helps us navigate the bizarre realities that life throws our way. And as I go to bed tonight, I feel a peace knowing that each day is a chance to weave new stories into the fabric of our collective experience, curving gracefully into the unknown. Perhaps that's what life is all about, embracing the glitches, the flaws, and the moments where honesty truly becomes our currency, a continued lasting lesson echoing softly in the chambers of my heart. As I settled into bed that night, the weight of the past few months drifted like autumn leaves, gentle reminders of growth and change. The promotion had been more than an unexpected turn in my career, it seeped into the crevices of my day-to-day life, cultivating a deeper appreciation for my colleagues and the shared spaces we inhabited. I began nurturing friendships that felt like fresh blooms in the garden of my existence, moments filled with laughter over lunch breaks and genuine conversations that spilled into after-work gatherings. I recalled one chilly evening just a few weeks after receiving the promotion, when my coworkers and I gathered at a local bar, the air thick with the scent of spiced cider and the chatter of laughter. We traded stories about insignificant mishaps that turned into hilariously exaggerated tales, Like the time I attempted to fix the office printer, only to battle it for what felt like hours, ultimately throwing in the towel to let my supervisor handle it. It was then that I fully realized the important distinction between taking oneself too seriously and weaving humor into the fabric of our everyday struggles. As these friendships blossomed, an unforeseen layer of responsibility accompanied my new role, demanding diligence and a commitment to accountability that at times felt daunting. I was tasked with leading our weekly meetings, bringing new ideas to the table while simultaneously keeping the energy uplifting. On one particularly rainy Thursday, I stood before my colleagues, a mix of nerves and excitement swirling within me. As I delved into the agenda, I noticed one of my new friends, Sarah, leaned back in her chair with this mischievous grin. In that moment, I took a breath, recalling the previous turmoil I'd endured, and slipped into the comfort of authenticity that had served me well in the past. I turned the meeting into a collage of brainstorming, encouraging everyone to toss wild imaginaries into the bowl, and with every idea tossed about, it felt as if we weren't just colleagues anymore, we were a chorus, blending our distinct harmonies into a melody of creativity. However, not long after, an interesting dilemma nudged at the corners of my happiness. Rumors swirled through the office about impending layoffs that left many in a cloud of anxiety. It was gut-wrenching to watch as stress drained the light from our vibrant discussions, replacing it with somber whispers. I couldn't ignore the creeping sense of dread that accompanied these conversations, and soon found myself in the break room, cooking up an idea to diffuse the tension. With a heart full of hope, I organized a day of gratitude, inviting everyone to share things they appreciated about their roles, whether it was the comfort of our shared coffee mugs, a favorite project, or even an early Friday wrap-up, the simplest joys that framed our work life. That day unfolded like a soft unfurling cocoon, as laughter replaced anxiety. As the room filled with genuine appreciation for one another, I felt the intertwining threads of community tighten around us, forming an unyielding bond against the uncertainty that loomed outside. In this peculiar patchwork of existence, I also confronted the inevitable feeling of vulnerability that lay in expressing gratitude. I learned just how important it was to acknowledge our fears and challenges, but alongside them, the shimmering possibilities that friendship and camaraderie could nurture. Reflecting on this experience as I settled back into bed that night, a glimmer of realization poked through my usual snuggles of comfort. Life, in its erratic brilliance, had brought about transformations not just in my career, but in the heart of who I was becoming. I smiled at the echoing lesson. Embracing uncertainty became far easier when shared with a circle of laughter and warmth. And as the time dripped away into the stillness of the night, I understood that the essence of my journey hinged on this idea: by owning our stories, glitches and all, we weave ourselves into the bigger tapestry of existence, healing within every shared confession and uplifting each other through every curveball life throws our way. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the dim light of my living room felt a little too intimate for a solitary life, and I sat down to scroll through the endless feeds of social media, half-heartedly looking for something to entertain my weary mind when I stumbled upon an article titled "Nearly Half of U.S. Adults Say Dating Has Gotten Harder in the Last 10 Years." Curious and slightly amused, I clicked on it, my heart sinking a bit as a flood of familiar sentiments washed over me: frustration, loneliness, and an overwhelming sense of nostalgia for a simpler time. You see, I'm 32 now, and while I like to believe that I have a good sense of humor and a decent collection of interests, the past decade of dating had been anything but kind. Part of me wondered whether it was just me, navigating the turbulent waters of relationships, or if the currents had indeed shifted. I spent a few years in a serious relationship, only to unravel into a heap of missed opportunities and awkward Tinder messages after it ended, and as I read through the comments beneath the article, I saw reflections of my own struggles: faceless strangers sharing tales of ghosting, lousy pickups, and the hollow echo of a once vibrant dating scene. I thought about the last guy I dated, Mark, who had seemed so perfect on paper. Conversations flowed easily, we shared a love for bad puns and obscure 90s sitcoms, but then it unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. There was confusion about commitment and future interests, and I remember the moment he casually mentioned that he didn't want to label what we had. I couldn't understand why such a simple phrase felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under me. The invisible connection we had was palpable, yet it seemed to tether him with a sense of dread. My thoughts spiraled, suffocating creative ideals of love and a warming trend of increasing expectations, unsolicited dating advice from friends who watched every swipe I took as if the stakes were life or death. The irony was that even as the pages of my dating life flipped with a quickened pace, I found myself more isolated than ever, existing in a modern world designed to connect but somehow bestowed with the weight of disconnection. Had we done this to ourselves? The virtual blooms of online dating were ghost towns after the initial swell of excitement faded. Swiping became an almost automated motion rather than an exploration of new meanings, and I truly felt baffled by the thought that perhaps love had turned into a fast food mentality, quick, inconsequential, and often unsatisfying. That night, as I slipped into bed surrounded by the soft hum of streetlights filtering through the curtains, I felt an unwavering sense of weariness but also a flicker of hope, wondering if there was a way to rediscover authentic connections. I recalled a conversation I had with my grandmother just a few weeks before, an endearing woman full of wisdom, who recounted her youth in a world where love letters were precious and meeting someone meant risking rejection, which somehow made the connection feel all the more profound. So, here I am, still pondering, still swiping cautiously, feeling the thorn of anxiety prick each time my phone buzzes with a new match. The complexity of finding someone who truly sees me, who values the depth of connection over the fleeting chase, leaves me with a soft determination. I refuse to believe that love is only wrapped in the aura of instant gratification. All of this led me to reflect on my own desires, to lay a foundation of honesty and vulnerability rather than attempting to navigate a maze of manufactured connections. Days later, in between work and a string of mundane social interactions, I sat down at a cafe, determined to write out the thoughts swirling in my mind. But I wasn't just writing. I opened a book on relationships, one of those infamous self-help titles that seemed to taunt me with glossed-over solutions. Suddenly, amidst the pages and coffee stains, I noticed something: a middle-aged couple, their hands intertwined, speaking softly to each other like old friends enjoying a quiet secret. In their presence, I felt something shift inside me, a reminder that love isn't just a mere game or fleeting moment. It is about the connections we nurture, the patience we exhibit, and the stories we share. As I walked out of the cafe that afternoon, the sun casting a warm light on my face, I felt less burdened. Instead of isolating my search for a partner, I was growing ever more committed to entering any future relationship with authenticity, willing to embrace the complexities, the messiness of human experience, and even the beautiful unpredictability that comes with being open to people who might not fit into neat little boxes. The dating scene may have changed, but perhaps it's also about taking a step back to truly figure out what I want and why I want it in the first place. It won't happen overnight. After all, meaningful connections take time. But as I continue to navigate this stubborn, evolving landscape of love, I find comfort in knowing that I am not alone, and maybe just maybe, that flicker of hope for something deeper is enough to keep my spirits alive. Update: a month later, after attending a small book club event to spark discussions around various love stories, I met Claire, a fellow book lover whose laughter felt like the first page to an unwritten narrative between us. We talked for hours. Our conversation flowed as freely as the wine, weaving through ideas about relationships and the essence of connection, and for the first time in a long while, the spark felt genuine and eager, hinting at the possibility of crafting yet another story together, this time, one that embraces the complexities rather than shies away from them. Despite the promising start with Claire, I found myself perched on the precipice of doubt. As the days turned into weeks, I replayed our conversations in my mind. Convinced that the connection simmering beneath our shared words was fragile, like the spine of a well-loved book, creased and vulnerable. Our subsequent meetings felt charged with a mixture of thrill and trepidation. Intimate coffee dates morphed into long discussions of our personal narratives, each revealing a tapestry of past loves and heartbreaks. One afternoon, as we sat on a sun-dappled bench in the park, Claire shared stories of her previous relationships, how she once dated a musician who believed passion was an erratic flame that couldn't be contained, only invited in for fleeting moments. I admired her honesty, feeling a kinship in her vulnerability, and shared my own tales of sorrow that echoed her sentiments. It was cathartic, this exchange of rawness, yet it left me haunted by the nagging worry of my romantic ineptitude, that perhaps I had glimpsed the sun but felt unworthy of its warmth. I wanted to keep nurturing that newfound bond, but the fear of failure lingered, muddying my heart's waters. Then, one evening, after our book club discussions took a playful turn into what love stories truly entailed, Claire leaned closer and whispered, "What do you think is the most important trait in a partner?" I paused, taken aback as I felt the weight of her gaze pierce through my self-doubt. The truth hovered at the edge of my tongue, and suddenly, my heart was alive with purpose. Vulnerability, I found myself saying, the word smoothing over the anxiety knotting my stomach. It's essential to share your true self, flaws included. Claire nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face as if the moment had cracked open an abstract painting between us. She was reflecting something I desperately wanted to believe, to be seen, truly seen, without the fear of scorn. That honesty shimmered through our subsequent encounters, leading us into new depths of connection. Yet, the road to this authenticity wasn't without potholes. I stumbled upon an old photo of my ex tucked away in my drawer, and the sudden swell of nostalgia pained me. I recalled the late-night texts, the joy we once shared, the way it all crumbled into misunderstandings and silence. That evening, with the remnants of our last date swirling in my mind, I found myself hesitating to message Claire, afraid that shadows of my past would taint what we had begun to craft. But the next day, I took a deep breath and reached out, asking her to talk over dinner. The moment I saw her smile, the tension in my chest eased just a little. I found myself sharing everything, the memories that haunted me and the way they colored my perspective on this new chapter. Claire listened, her compassionate eyes never wavering, and by the time I finished my story, I felt light, as though I had released a hidden weight. To my surprise, she opened up about her own past experiences, revealing troubled relationships that led to her insecurities, finding refuge in her love for literature that allowed her to escape. As she shared her truth, a sense of warmth enveloped us, binding our stories together and creating a safe harbor where vulnerability flourished. From that point on, we agreed to navigate our relationship as readers of an unwritten book, one where each chapter would be approached with honesty and mutual respect. Yet, as much as our connection grew stronger, I couldn't shake the feeling of inevitable change. It felt like waiting for the last page to turn. About a month later, as we strolled together through a local art fair, I sensed a shift. The air around us brimmed with anticipation. Claire paused before a canvas, her eyes captivated by the swirling colors. I watched as her expression transformed, finding beauty in the imperfections of the artwork, and suddenly the words slipped out, unplanned, "I'm falling for you." As soon as I said it, I felt my heart seize in desperation, but she turned to me, eyes wide with surprise, and then a grin spread across her face. "Good," she replied, her voice steady. "I think I might be falling for you, too." The palpable tension melted away as we stood together in that moment of shared revelation, our fears surrendering to the joy of the honesty we had forged, a connection that no longer felt like a fragile parchment but a tapestry rich with color and texture. As we moved from the art fair to the quiet of a nearby coffee shop, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my earlier concerns transforming into hope. Seating ourselves at a small table nestled in the corner, I looked into Claire's eyes, thinking how this moment felt like a new, thrilling chapter of our story. Weeks turned to months, and while we did face challenges, moments of miscommunication that sparked doubts or past insecurities surfacing like forgotten shadows, we learned to navigate them together. Late-night discussions became a routine, where we transformed frustrations into understanding, reminding ourselves that we were not only authors of our own stories but co-creators of this shared narrative, steering it forward with determination and love. Each step forward felt like a tiny victory, and with every encounter, the initial fear of commitment softened into a love that was no longer simplistic but beautifully complex. Reflecting on those early days, I now understand why there's a quote I once read that kept echoing in my mind: "Love, I learned, is not merely about finding the right one but about creating something right together, weaving memories into the very fabric of your shared existence." As I sit here, sipping coffee and writing this down, I realize I stumbled into what I had only hoped for. A love story shaped not by the echoes of past relationships but crafted from renewed hope, shared laughter, and an unwavering commitment to embrace the struggles of connection. Maybe dating had become complicated over the years, perhaps it had morphed into a labyrinth where many found themselves lost, but I finally learned that amid the confusion, there exists beauty, a beauty that envelops you in warmth when you allow yourself to be vulnerable. I'm not sure how this story will unfold, but for now, I'm grateful for every page that Claire and I continue to write together. As I close my laptop, I find peace in the thought that this narrative is still in progress, untouched and full of potential, just waiting for us to explore. Days turned into weeks, and what had begun as a simple conversation over the clinking of glasses at the book club evolved into a comfortable routine that both bewildered and delighted me. Claire and I would trade texts in the morning, each one an invitation to another lively debate, another shared thought that blossomed into broader horizons. We explored quaint coffee shops filled with the scent of freshly ground beans, sat in bustling libraries among dusty tomes, and strolled through leaf-strewn parks as autumn draped its colors around us. It amazed me how easily the words fell between us, how despite the complex layers of dating I had previously navigated, the connection with Claire felt refreshingly straightforward, refreshing like the crisp, cool air of a fall evening. We thrived in our discussions about literature, love, and the intricate dance of human relationship dynamics, often laughing at the misadventures we faced in our past romances. But as magical as our budding romance felt, I couldn't shake the gnawing shadow of my insecurities. After years of confusion and disappointments in the dating scene, I found myself plagued by moments of doubt. What if this was all too good to be true? What if Claire's laughter was merely a beautiful prelude to louder, harsher realities? One evening, we found ourselves huddled up on my couch, 2 mugs of chamomile steaming between us as the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon. It was soft and intimate, the kind of moment that felt like it should be framed and hung on a wall. Suddenly, as we trailed off from a conversation about character arcs, I felt that familiar discomfort wash over me. "Claire," I began, my voice uncertain, "I don't want to scare you or ruin what we have, but I need to share something." The warmth in her eyes dimmed slightly, just enough to tell me I had pricked the veneer of our cozy evening. "What is it?" she asked gently, her attention entirely on me. I took a breath, summoning courage. "I guess I'm wondering how you see this, us. I've struggled with connection, and I can't help but feel hesitant. What if I mess it up?" A moment of silence stretched between us, and I held my breath, weaving through my fears and waiting for her response. Claire placed her mug down and leaned forward, her expression serious yet kind. "You know, I've felt that too," she admitted softly, her honesty disarming me. "The last few dates I had weren't what I hoped they'd be either, leaving me feeling like I was just going through the motions. But this, what we have, it doesn't feel like anything I've experienced before. It feels comfortable, yes, but also thrilling. I'm not in a rush. I want to explore this with you." I let out a sigh of relief, realizing that vulnerability had granted me more than I expected. As the conversation meandered once again, I felt a weight lift. The beauty lay not in certainty, but in the fluidity of our development together, our stories intertwining like chapters of a well-loved book. Throughout the next few weeks, I learned to appreciate our gentle unraveling of connection. We embarked on small adventures, wandering farmers' markets, engaging in light-hearted debates over dinner, and letting time stretch blissfully as we discovered new layers to one another. With each shared glance, each brush of fingers, something inside me shifted. I began to revel in the present moment instead of living in fear of its potential future endings. But just as it often happens in life, as tranquility painted over our days, shadows from the past crept in. One chilly night, Claire confided her own horizon of past heartbreaks, an agonizing relationship riddled with betrayal and secrets that had once left her questioning her own worth. I listened intently, hoping she could find solace in my presence, reflecting on how we, too, had been shaped by our own struggles. It was surreal, a powerful moment where 2 narratives fused, echoing each other's pain but just as equally, reassuring hope. When our fingers intertwined that night, the connection felt electric yet grounded, a reminder that we were 2 people choosing to step into the vulnerability together, reaffirming the beauty and honesty in shared healing. There was no way to predict how our ongoing story would unfold. Rather, I learned to savor the chapters we continued to write, open to the unexpected plot twists that might emerge along the way. As the cold months passed into blooming spring, our comfort transitioned to laughter and light-hearted banter that filled our encounters with an even deeper affection. Then one evening, just as the sun began its descent into a vibrant orange hue, Claire pulled a book from her bag. It was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, a tapestry of journeying and fate. She had read it several times but wanted to explore it with me. As we settled onto a park bench with the world around us fading into a gentle melody of birds chirping and children laughing, we delved into the themes that unraveled in each chapter, sharing perspectives, dreams, and our own losses. I could see how each narrative spoke to the idea of pursuing your personal legend, laying bare the truth that sometimes, the greatest story we can write is the one woven through the connection we forge with another. Claire's laughter erupted as we climbed higher into our discussions about destiny, fear, and the courage to love. It felt right to be there, and I marveled at how lifted I felt amongst the blooms of cherry blossoms. While the past may have forced me to walk through a maze of trials, it led me to this moment, surrounded by the woman who didn't feel like I was merely worthy of love but, instead, someone who had become a beautiful story I couldn't wait to keep writing. Life would inevitably throw its challenges our way, but what I learned was that as we navigated this journey together, the real weight lay in our capacity to embrace the uncertainty while continuing to choose each other, to be each other's anchors. As I hold on to this thought, I let it resonate in the quiet of the evening, knowing we were ready to write the next pages of our lives, unrushed and open, just like a beautifully unfolding book waiting to share its finest secrets. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat alone at my desk, the soft click of my computer keys breaking the stillness of the late afternoon. There was a flicker of a notification on my screen, a question that had been posted to Ask Reddit, asking what topic one would choose to give a 1-hour informative speech about for $10,000 if they had no choice but to do so right then and there. The absurdity of it sparked a flicker of excitement. What if I really had to speak in front of a crowd? I found myself imagining various topics flickering through my mind. As a teacher, I had the privilege of learning alongside my students, unraveling the mysteries of the world through our discussions. My stature as a seasoned educator shifted somewhere deep within me as I fought the creeping anxiety at the thought of standing before a crowd, my heart racing at the idea of being thrust into the spotlight. After a brief moment of considering the daunting task, I settled on something that had always lingered in the background of my passions: the significance of storytelling through community history. It was a topic close to my heart, woven into the threads of my own life. I began to visualize the faces of the community members I knew, rich in stories yet unchronicled, the small-town narratives that rarely found a place in textbooks, the tales of resilience, heartbreak, and triumph shared over coffee and pie at the local diner. But as I settled into my daydream of an eager crowd nodding respectfully at my passionate presentation, a sudden shift occurred. The hum in the room became punctuated by an abrupt voice: "You have to give a speech right now." The words echoed in my mind for a moment, and I looked up, convinced I was imagining things. But the stern figure in front of me was real, a classmate from college, Mike, who had always been an extroverted whirlwind, charismatic in a way I envied. "You said you could talk about anything. This is your chance to show what you've got. $10,000. He persisted, eyes wide with an infectious enthusiasm that I couldn't quite resist. The mixture of disbelief, amusement, and an adrenaline surge washed over me. In an instant, I found my mind racing with the knowledge I wanted to impart. As I stood, I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest, the nagging fear of public speaking, the memories of stumbling over my words in past endeavors washed over me like waves. Yet, I breathed in deeply, and the anticipation of the unexpected opportunity compelled me forward, my feet moving before my mind could intervene. Mike led me toward an impromptu gathering of colleagues in the next conference room. My heart thudded against my ribs, a metronome marking each passing second as I gathered my thoughts amidst the friendly jabs and encouraging nods from familiar faces. Once I reached the front of the makeshift room, I paused, glancing across the assortment of eager eyes. I noticed a few raised eyebrows and smirks. But there was also a palpable curiosity. I took a deep breath, my voice hiccuping at first as I began to speak about community storytelling, the importance of listening, archiving, and sharing our histories. Each word that slipped from my lips grew more confident as I dove deeper into how weaving together the fabric of a community helps nurture connections. With each anecdote shared, I saw nods of understanding and glimpses of recognition. It became more than just a speech, it was a dialogue that blossomed into a shared experience, reminding me of those conversations that punctuated our everyday lives. As I reached the crescendo of my narrative, I felt as if the pieces of me that often laid dormant found their rhythm, summoning melancholic memories while dancing joyously with hope. When I finally concluded, the room erupted in applause, a flood of appreciation that momentarily washed away my insecurities. I laughed lightly, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. As Mike approached with a cheeky grin and a mock bow, the ripples of unexpected camaraderie pushed against the boundaries of my initial awkwardness, redefining my perception of myself and the impact I could create. As time passed, the impromptu speech became a topic of light-hearted conversation, an unexpected spark igniting new projects centered on oral histories within our community. I decided to dedicate my weekends to recording interviews with locals, documenting their stories for a collaborative project blending art and history. Reflecting on this experience taught me that sometimes, the greatest opportunities emerge from the most frightening moments, nudging us to grow right through our fears. A final thought lingered in my mind: we all have stories worth telling, ones that shape who we are. A week later, I posted an update on the thread. It had turned out the impromptu speech was merely the beginning of a beautiful venture, and as I felt the warmth of community around me, I knew I had found a piece of myself I had previously overlooked, a reminder that sometimes, the most important stories are our own. A week later, I had posted an update on the thread, sharing how that impromptu speech had turned into so much more than just a fleeting moment of terror. It dawned on me as I sat in my living room, the faint hum of the city outside a comforting backdrop, how that day had been a pebble tossed into the still waters of my life, creating ripples I hadn't anticipated. Initially, when the adrenaline had faded and the laughter of my colleagues had turned into a playful joke, I felt lightheaded, a bit disoriented about what I had opened up to. But with each passing day, the realization of the audience's genuine interest in my experiences began to take root in my mind, pushing me to explore deeper expressions of myself, into the realms of vulnerability I had long buried under layers of caution and self-doubt. So, I started a blog, gradually crafting narratives around the various facets of my life, the heartbreak of my college years, the joy of falling in love, and the quiet pangs of loneliness that sometimes sneaked in even in a crowded room. Those stories transformed, reflecting my sorrow, my laughter, and my fears in a way that felt both cleansing and electrifying, almost as if I were giving them voice for the first time. I shared it with friends, unsure about their reaction, expecting just polite nods and smiles, but instead, I received heartfelt messages of gratitude and appreciation, each one a reminder that we all navigated the same phases of life, sometimes feeling utterly alone. Encouraged, I reached out to an audience wider than my circle of acquaintances. I began to hear echoes of my thoughts and feelings reverberate through the comments and emails that flooded in. Readers shared their own tales, stories tinged with sorrow and redemption, thanking me for speaking out, as if in that open space I had created, they found a platform to unveil their truths. A month later, I hosted an online event titled Tell Your Story, inviting everyone from strangers to friends to step into the virtual spotlight and share. That night, I felt a glaze of contentment wash over me as I listened to voices from all walks of life, each one weaving pieces of their hearts into the fabric of our shared experience. It was a cacophony of human emotion and connection, resembling a melodic symphony wherein each note represented pain, growth, love, and resilience. I had no idea the event would gather hundreds, or that it would light a spark in my heart, a yearning to explore storytelling as both a medium and a means of healing for myself and others. As the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm glow through my window, I reflected on how a simple, terrifying moment of being thrown into the spotlight had acted as a catalyst for growth. Crafting my stories felt like stitching together broken pieces of a beautiful quilt, where each patch represented a fragment of experience, an echo of who I was and who I aimed to become. I paraphrased that sentiment in my follow-up post, sharing how the connections I had cultivated opened my eyes to the weight of our stories and how vital they are within this vast universe of forgotten voices. As the comments rolled in, filled with encouragement and resonance, I smiled at my screen, feeling the kinship that came from revealing our raw parts. Reflecting back, I realized how the task of giving an hour-long speech had propelled me forward into a journey rich with discovery, pervaded by the understanding that when we each tell our stories, however trivial they may seem, we breathe life into others, creating a vibrant tapestry of shared human experience. And as I let that thought settle comfortably in my mind, I whispered a quiet promise to myself: I would continue to share, continue to connect, and allow this newfound sense of purpose to blossom into something greater than I could ever fathom at that moment. So, I made it my mission to seek out opportunities to share my experiences, no matter how mundane they might seem on the surface. The following weekend, I found myself at a local community center, where a group of individuals from all walks of life gathered to share their truths. The atmosphere hummed with anticipation, a vibrant tapestry of voices ready to be woven together. I watched as each person stood up, some trembling with nerves, others bursting with energy, and with every story told, I felt a flicker of connection. My own turn approached, and, recalling the buzz of the audience from my first speech, I took a deep breath, recalling the way they leaned in, engaged and willing to absorb what I had to say. When I spoke, it was about vulnerability, the invisible weight it carries, the power in opening up. I shared a poignant memory from my childhood, a time when I had felt out of place and alone at school until, one day, a kindred spirit had approached me. As I recounted how that single act of friendship had turned my world upside down in the best way possible, the room filled with murmurs of recognition and connection. It was then I understood that we all grapple with our own insecurities, grappling silently until someone dares to cut through the noise and reach out. The joy of sharing and the profound weight of connection lingered long after I stepped down from that makeshift stage, and in that moment, I realized that this was the nourishment I had hungered for: validation, compassion, and understanding. Days turned into weeks, and I became a regular at the community center, leading workshops and discussions on storytelling and the power it holds, finding joy in helping others craft their narratives. The feedback was overwhelming, stories flowed like water, and each shared experience seemed to shine a light on hidden corners of our lives we might otherwise carry alone. One evening, we hosted a storytelling night that had drawn in a larger crowd than I had anticipated, a mix of familiar faces and strangers eager to share. I sat back in the corner, a warm glow settling over me, serving as a gentle reminder of how far I had come. The air buzzed with laughter, tears, and gasps, and I listened intently, feeling almost like a proud guardian of this burgeoning community. After the event, I noticed a woman who had been sitting quietly at the back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. When I approached her, she simply embraced me, and in that moment, I felt the undeniable power of connection, that a few shared words could transcend individual stories and shape something much bigger. A few months later, I received an unexpected message. Someone had suggested I compile the stories I had encountered into a book, separate and distinct narratives that collectively illustrated the breadth of human experience. It felt like an invitation to explore a greater purpose, a chance to preserve the moments that had touched me so deeply. It was daunting, but I took a leap of faith, pouring each tale into my own reflections until they mingled together in a rhythm that felt just right. With every chapter, I penned not just the stories but the threads that pulled our lives together, dissimilar yet intertwined. Finally, the day came when I held the first printed copy in my hands. My heart swelled with pride and vulnerability alike. As I stood at the community center table, selling the book, I was met with enemy fear and familiar joy. To my surprise, familiar faces flooded in, sharing their thoughts about how storytelling had impacted their lives and how my journey had inspired them. I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, a quiet recognition tinged with joy. It was no longer just about me. This had grown into an extension of us all, breathing life into the stories that shaped the fabric of our existence. People left with copies in hand and a spark in their eyes, and among them was the woman from that first storytelling night. She approached, her voice soft but resolute. "Thank you for creating this space. Thank you for gathering us." Little did she know how infinitely grateful I felt for that simple moment of acknowledgement. As the months passed and I continued sharing my book, the threads of community solidified, weaving us closer together, transforming strangers into allies, kindred spirits in shared struggles. It became clear how the act of telling stories was nothing less than an invitation to be seen. It was an avenue for us to collectively heal. My initial fears had melted away, giving me the courage to step into vulnerability, and from that, a radiant community emerged, fostering warmth and compassion. It was as if my story had been but a pebble, cast into still water, sending ripples far beyond anything I could have anticipated. There was no final chapter, only an open-ended tale of connection and resilience that carried on, echoing the sentiment I had first encountered, a reminder that we all have stories worth sharing. And as I closed my eyes at night, I let the whispers of those stories settle into my heart, a song of humanity reminding me we were all in this together, forever intertwined in the powerful, beautiful tapestry that is life. I spent most of my life firmly believing in the power of the little plastic bottle that sat atop my bathroom sink, an unassuming thing, really, but the promise it held was monumental. It was a miracle serum, or so the infomercials claimed, and for nearly 20 years, I swore by its supposed ability to rid my skin of every blemish, flake, and imperfection. I remember being a teenager, scrolling through forum posts late at night, reading incredible testimonials about how this product transformed lives. It was called Radiance Essence, and the blue and gold labeling seduced me with the idea of beauty, allure, and confidence. Over the years, I had fallen into quite a ritual. I'd wash my face with my favorite soap, pat it dry, and then gently massage the serum into my skin. Each application felt like a small act of self-love, believing fully that I was preemptively thwarting acne and any signs of aging. Fast forward to just a few weeks ago, when I found myself scrolling through a thread titled "What is a product that you swore by your whole life, but have only recently learned that it's essentially just snake oil?" I hesitated at first, but curiosity pulled me in. I started reading the comments, each revealing personal tales of heartache and embarrassing discoveries, as users detailed their own revelations about miracle cures that turned out to be little more than lies cleverly wrapped in shiny packages. One comment stood out starkly: "Dear God, Radiance Essence is just scented water." My heart sank as I read about someone else's life-changing epiphany, feeling as if a gut punch had toppled my entire belief system. For a moment, I sat in silence, replaying memories of all the times I'd turned to that bottle in joy and despair, when all I had really been doing was splashing water on my face. A gnawing unease began to settle in, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I remembered vividly those times when my friends would compliment my skin, and I'd credit my radiant glow to the serum. Suddenly, those moments felt hollow, tainted by what I was now beginning to fathom. Was I living a lie? The next morning, spurred by an insatiable need for answers, I pored over product ingredients and reviews, plunging into a whirlpool of information that made my head spin. The more I uncovered, the more I felt deceived, dates of patent expirations, lawsuits against false claims, customer service representatives claiming it was discontinued for formulation improvements, all signs pointing to the truth I hadn't been ready to face. The weight of realization pressed heavily on my chest. How could I have been so naive? Reluctantly, I canceled my monthly subscription, stared at the lonely vial that had been a constant presence, and placed it in a drawer, further distancing myself from what once brought me comfort. Still, in the quiet recesses of my mind, I felt a lost connection to those moments of misguided faith that had seemed to carry so much significance. It wasn't just about skincare, it was the coping mechanism in an unpredictable world, the reliable promise of a little self-improvement. I spent the next few days in reflection, exploring what beauty truly meant to me, without external validation or the dependability of a product. I began taking long walks, reveling in the gentle caress of the wind against my skin, committing to nourishing my body from within by drinking more water, eating wholesome foods, and practicing gratitude for what I had. As the weeks flowed smoothly past like a gentle river, I noticed a shift in my perception not only of myself but also of the world around me. I began to see beauty in simplicity, a smile from a stranger, the colors of sunset streaking the sky, the fleeting joys of each new day. I found a community of people who, too, had awakened to the idea that beauty rituals come in many forms, and that self-love went beyond the confines of a bottle. In sharing my experience, I discovered many felt the same. Many had been struck by the realization of placing too much faith in superficial enhancements and were now embracing their authentic selves. In that exchange, I felt a relief wash over me, a sense of solidarity. My vulnerability had woven a new thread in the fabric of my life's journey, and I began to appreciate the skin I was in, blemishes and all. As I closed the chapter on my reliance on Radiant's essence, I felt free, able to define beauty on my own terms, which felt, in many ways, far richer than anything that could be bought in a bottle. Several weeks later, I decided to revisit the thread that had triggered this incredible transformation. Scrolling through the responses again, I felt a sense of gratitude for the moment of clarity I had received. Tucked away amongst the confessions was an update from the original poster. It's wild how many of us are waking up to the truth of our perceived flaws. I started a support group for skin positivity. Inspiration washed over me, and with a deep, calm breath, I felt inclined to share my story, offering not just my confession but also a glimpse of hope to anyone still held captive by their expectations. I submitted my thoughts with a smile, grateful for a community that had propelled me into rediscovering myself. As I hit send, I understood that true radiance was found not in a bottle, but in the acceptance of our own beautifully imperfect selves. As I release my thoughts into the void of cyberspace, a wave of relief washes over me, like stepping out into sunlight after being trapped in shadow for too long. In that moment, it felt as if the weight of years spent hiding behind the veneer of flawless skin was finally lifting. I had spent so much of my life obsessed with concealers, serums, and exfoliants, believing that each product was a step towards some unattainable ideal, some version of myself that others would deem worthy. But the idea that I could simply shed those expectations, that I could unfold my story and share it with others, filled me with a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in ages. With each day, I found that I was embracing my natural texture, the small scars from teenage battles, the laugh lines etched into my face with joy over the years. They were all markers of my journey, not imperfections to hide. As days turned into weeks, I kept returning to that online forum, and with each post I read, I felt more connected to the stories of others who had also donned the mask society had pressed upon us. One member, Tara, shared her experiences with severe acne throughout high school, how she would meticulously cover her skin in thick layers of makeup that often made things worse rather than better. Reading her words struck a chord, echoing my own past struggles. It was reassuring to know that I wasn't alone in this. We messaged back and forth, and soon we were part of a small group that would meet virtually every weekend. Each call was filled with laughter, sharing anecdotes about the ridiculous things we used to believe, the products that failed to deliver on their promises, and the crazy lengths we went to in pursuit of that elusive perfect skin. As much as I cherished these connections, one Friday evening, I found myself grappling with a sudden bout of anxiety. I had been invited to a friend's birthday party, an event that would surely feature ample photographs and the inevitable aspect of being scrutinized by those playful fingers ready to brandish their phones. I had not fully surrendered my fear of judgment. As I prepared for the party, staring in the mirror, the familiar tug at my self-assurance emerged. My reflection seemed to scream at me, urging me to conform, to cover up what I had ownership over only weeks prior. But then I remembered the mantra I had stumbled upon in our group: "Your worth is not determined by your skin." The phrase resonated with me. I let my gaze soften, recognizing the contours of my face, the little dimples and freckles that I had once deemed flaws. With a deep breath, I decided I wouldn't apply anything more than my light moisturizer. Instead, I opted for a dash of mascara and a swipe of lip gloss to hint at the vibrant person beneath the careful layers I had worn for so long. At the party, the first few moments felt like an eternity, a tightrope walk between the comfortable and the vulnerable. My pulse quickened as I navigated through the gathering, but then something surprising happened. I found joy bubbling within me, laughing and sharing stories, feeling an ease in being simply present without the expectation of a flawless facade. When a friend asked to take a candid photo of our ridiculous dance moves, I instinctively fell into place, muscles relaxing as I realized I was no longer shackled by the need to appear perfect. Afterward, scrolling through the photos, I felt a bittersweet pang of nostalgia for that person I used to be, lost among the mirrored reflections and idealized images. Yet, as I examined my own image, bare and real, I saw not just imperfections but life, vibrancy, and authenticity, a celebration of who I was, an unfiltered moment among friends. That night, I posted one of those photos on my feed, accompanied by a heartfelt caption about embracing our true selves and the beauty of vulnerability. The response surprised me. Comments poured in, expressing admiration, sharing their own struggles, and supporting my newfound stance against unrealistic beauty standards. It felt as if my story resonated beyond outlines of skin and into deeper connections of understanding and care. Encouraged, I kept sharing my journey, my learning, my mishaps, and the small victories I celebrated. It wasn't just about my skin anymore, it became a movement of sorts, one where we all stood unified in our imperfections, refusing the dictation of what beauty should be. Reflecting back on the origins of my journey, I felt a sense of pride to have transformed what once held me captive into a beacon of hope for others. As I stand here, full circle and radiant in my own way, I realize that rediscovering oneself is an ongoing journey, one where each wave of self-acceptance washes away the remnants of past insecurities. And while I still have days of doubt, they do not define me. What carries me forward is the community we've built together, a tapestry of imperfections woven into something beautiful, accompanied by the unwavering belief that true radiance is born from love, love for ourselves, our stories, and every scar that has shaped who we are. Update: I've gone on to lead a series of local workshops on self-acceptance, and much to my delight, I have connected through these events with even more incredible people, each of whom has contributed to this beautiful circle of empowerment. We've recently started a project to create a zine that collects our stories, a testament that we can turn our struggles into art and connection. I'm excited for what the future holds and grateful for all the paths that have converged to lead me to this moment. Every day, I keep reminding myself, our stories matter, and in sharing them, we gift others the courage to embrace their own journey. As I sat in my cozy nook, surrounded by the soft glow of fairy lights and the comforting scent of lavender candles, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was in this space where I often found solace, a retreat from the chaos of the world, where I could reflect on my journey and the transformative power of vulnerability. The zine project was now well underway, and every meeting with the group filled me with purpose, each member adding their unique voice into the tapestry we were weaving. I remembered our first gathering, how tentative we all were, exchanging nervous glances as we shared our stories of hurt and self-doubt. I had spoken about my long-term relationship with the so-called miracle cream I had religiously applied since my teenage years, convinced it would one day bring me the flawless skin I had always coveted. The room had filled with laughter and knowing nods when one brave soul shared her own tale of a $30 jar of liquid confidence, which had only caused breakouts and added to her insecurities rather than erasing them. Each shared experience was like peeling back layers of skin. We laid bare our raw emotions, exposing the scars left by the beauty industry's tall tales. With every story, we found connection, laughter, and healing, understanding we were not alone in our struggles. After a few months, when the first draft of our zine was completed, I felt a flutter of excitement deep in my chest. We had decided to host a small launch party at a local cafe, where we would not only unveil our work but also celebrate our collective empowerment. As the day approached, the air buzzed with anticipation. I could already picture the small crowd of supportive friends, family, and even a few local journalists who had expressed interest in our project. With our contributions in hand, we prepared to share our journeys not just as isolated individuals but as a unified chorus echoing the message of self-acceptance. And so, the day finally arrived, clear skies overhead, and the cafe transformed into a vibrant sanctuary of our stories. People mingled, sipping lavender lemonades and munching on tiny pastries adorned with edible flowers as I set up our makeshift display in the corner. My heart raced, but it also danced with joy to see the enthusiasm in my friends' eyes. As the moment approached, we gathered everyone's attention, our nerves giving way to exhilaration. One by one, we read excerpts from our zine, sharing not only our struggles but also the lessons we had learned along the way. Each word met with applause, and I could see tears and smiles exchanged throughout the audience, a visceral reminder of the power of our truths. I felt a profound connection that night, where the journey was not about selling a solution but about embracing our imperfections. We ended the night with an open mic, inviting others to share their stories, our circle expanding to include new voices in need of a platform. As I stepped away from the cafe, the air kissed my skin, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I had come to terms with my past obsession with beauty products that never delivered, but somehow, I had transitioned that pain into a pathway for healing, not just for myself but for others too. With a sense of fulfillment growing inside of me, I decided to launch a monthly podcast that would allow even more people to share their journeys. I envisioned deep conversations, laughter, and moments of vulnerability where we could all learn from each other's experiences. And in the stillness of that tranquil evening, I found the clarity I had long sought after. My skin was not my identity, nor were those facades I once believed would validate me. No, my identity was carved through my stories of resilience, compassion, and love. As the stars twinkled above, I made a silent promise to myself to continue creating a space where the beautiful tapestry of our imperfect lives could shine bright, illuminating the path for others still navigating their own tumultuous journeys. I felt gratitude swell in my chest. We are meant to be seen, heard, and loved for who we are, every flawless and flawed moment in between. This was just the beginning. The day I stumbled upon the life hack that changed everything for me began like any other. I was just an average guy named Jake, working a monotonous desk job in a bustling city and barely scraping by. My apartment was small, cramped, and perpetually cluttered, a chaotic reflection of my life's trajectory. Little did I know, lurking in the depths of the internet on a mundane Tuesday afternoon, I would discover something that felt almost sacred, an insider's guide to life improvement, buried within a thread titled Ask Reddit What's a Life Hack So Good You Almost Don't Want to Share It? As I read through the comments, most of which comprised people sharing their mediocre tips like freezing grapes for chillin' wine, I almost tuned out, but then I found it, a simple yet profound suggestion that promised to revolutionize my approach to work and life in general. Set your alarm to wake up exactly 1 hour earlier every day. Your productivity and mental clarity will skyrocket. I was doubtful at first, rolled my eyes at the idea of sacrificing an hour of sleep, but I couldn't shake the thought. After wrestling with my own frustrations about work and feeling like a ship lost at sea, I resolved to give it a shot. The first morning was an exercise in pure dread as my alarm screamed at me from across the room. Each minute of extra dark, quiet solitude felt like a battle against my will to stay under the covers, but the slight glow of a new dawn soon coaxed me into action. I brewed a pot of coffee that smelled like a promise fulfilled, sat down at my rickety kitchen table, and, for the first time in ages, opened my laptop to write. I poured out my thoughts, projects I had ideas for but never the energy to start, and plans I had shelved away like dusty books. And that first week of waking up early transformed my life. I began each day with purpose, finding hours that had previously slipped through my fingers like grains of sand. My productivity soared, and my mental health felt lighter, free from the weight of procrastination that had shackled me for years. You might say it was euphoric. I found a rhythm, a harmony with the world. I was able to exercise, meditate, read more, a zen oasis amid my chaotic existence. But as the days turned into weeks, I faced an unexpected dilemma that sent ripples through my newfound routine. My older brother, Tom, who had always been my confidant and trusted ally, doted on me during our weekly catch-ups, but recently, I noticed a growing concern etched across his face. One sunny Saturday, when we met up for coffee, he hesitated before speaking. "Jake, this is the third weekend in a row that you've been too busy for dinner with the family. Can we talk about it?" The guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream that this new lifestyle was essential for my well-being, but instead, I waited through the rising disappointment in his voice. I had suddenly become this creature of habit, my joys tethered to early mornings. But in doing so, had I cut off the companionship I'd cherished with my brother? I sank into a quiet internal storm, sliding between being proud of my improvements and grappling with the social rift they caused. After days of self-reflection, I realized I needed a balance, a compromise that would allow me to retain the tranquility of my mornings while still nurturing my important relationships. I resolved to give Tom a call that evening, and after an honest conversation filled with apologies and explanations, a truce was formed. Rather than abandon my new routine, we agreed on Sunday dinners, where we could catch up without intrusion. I could have my productivity without forsaking my family, an ideal fusion of my previous and present selves. It was a delicate harmony, one that came from understanding the deeper implications of my choices, and it transformed our relationship back into its former warmth. And so, as the seasons shifted and with them, my mornings evolved into sacred rituals rather than just productivity fueled by desperation. I discovered the clarity of thought that dreams and conversations shared over meals can lead to, a tangible surplus of joy that exceeded the figurative weight in hours gained. A few weeks passed, each morning becoming a grounding part of my routine, infusing my soul with energy. One evening, I found myself sitting on my couch, looking out at the world tinted by dusk, and I reflected on how sharing my newfound life hack had cultivated a multitude of connections, unexpected friendships blossoming where I had once dwelled in solitude. Life had its way of reminding me of the interconnections we often overlook. As I sit here typing this, I wonder if sharing my hack was indeed a good idea. It blurs the line of private joy and communal upliftment. Would the power I found in those early mornings hold the same sacred space if I distributed it freely? Maybe one life hack isn't meant to be kept a secret but shared, reshaped, and transformed through the experiences of every person who dares to wake up to life's offering in their own unique way. And as I concluded my thoughts, I realized the most poignant truth of all: sometimes a simple life hack opens the door not just to personal growth, but to richer bonds, deeper understanding, and a redefined sense of purpose, inviting us to embrace it all without reservation, life's essentials mingling with its greatest treasures. As I sat in the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the kitchen window, I felt a sense of calm settle around me. My mind, though racing with the implications of what I had just thought, was juxtaposed against the sheer beauty of the day awakening outside. The world felt intoxicatingly fresh, a canvas waiting for the gentle strokes of life that I was slowly beginning to understand. You see, the life hack I stumbled upon didn't involve any fancy apps or complicated productivity systems but rather an uncomplicated shift in perspective. I had learned that sometimes, the most mundane ritual, waking up with intention, could, in its own quiet way, transform the trajectory of my day, my relationships, and my joy. Over the past few months, I had experimented with this idea, rising earlier than I was accustomed to, before the chaos of the world invaded my peaceful sanctuary. It began as a desperate attempt to reclaim time from my perpetual morning rush, an irritation born from the mundane trappings of life, scrolling through emails, hurried breakfasts, and the nagging sense that I was losing precious moments to start afresh. But that diligent push to wake up earlier unfurled into something far richer. As I carved out an hour before the day's demands stole my attention, I found a space to breathe. I moved in slow motion, making a warm cup of tea, journaling about my thoughts and dreams, and even meditating in the quiet embrace of my home. Each sip of that warm beverage would wrap around me like a gentle hug, reinforcing my resolve to step into the day with clarity, purpose, and an open heart. Honestly, it felt extraordinary, like I was gifted a secret chamber of time where worries could not penetrate and the weight of expectation floated away. I began to notice how this small act of self-care rippled through the hours ahead of me. I was more present during breakfast with my family, more patient with the unpredictable whims of children, and more engaged in conversations that I used to let flow past me like white noise. It was as if I had donned a new pair of glasses, sharpening details in my perspective I had long dismissed. I reveled in quiet drives to work and greeted colleagues with renewed warmth. However, with this blossoming joy emerged an unexpected hesitation. Was this secret ritual of mine meant to be shared? Would revealing my newfound treasure dilute its magic or, worse, inspire envy or misunderstanding? Caught in this internal tug-of-war, I decided to experiment subtly. Over weekends, when my husband joined me for those early hours, I invited him into my sanctuary, sharing the solace I had discovered. In those hushed moments, I saw his demeanor soften, emerging from the chaos of past weeks where work had consumed our evenings. Slowly he began to cherish those serene mornings too, our laughter dancing in the air as we shared breakfast and exchanged dreams. It was this bond, the laughter, the vulnerability, the growth, that made me wonder whether this small act of kindness and clarity could be a gift, not just for ourselves, but for others. Wanting to share this idea, I took to a popular online forum one night and posed a question in a chat titled Ask Reddit: What's a life hack so good you almost don't want to share it? I wrote about my morning ritual, careful to frame it not as a command or an obligation but as a suggestion for those yearning for a little space of their own. What followed was a serendipitous avalanche of responses. People poured in with stories of their own rituals, ways of reclaiming time, or tips to savor the morning before the world demanded their attention. I felt electrified with connection, strangers resonating with the quiet rebellion of choosing to wake up to love and life, not burdens. A woman wrote about her late-night tea and early morning walks, while a young man spoke of the meticulous joy he found in preparing breakfast for his family, intertwining love with fried eggs and crispy bacon. Each anecdote was like a thread stitching our various experiences into a tapestry of shared humanity. Still, the most illuminating response came from a thoughtful user whose simple message lingered in my mind: how do we awaken not just ourselves but those around us? I paused to reflect on it. This was precisely what my mornings had begun to teach me, to acquire wisdom, not just for myself but to nurture in others, to invite them into that space of calm creativity. Perhaps this life hack was never meant to be hoarded but rather to flourish in the connections it could foster. As I gradually let my secret spread, I found excitement in conversations with friends, inviting them to join me for early coffee dates, sharing my early rising practice, and encouraging them to discover their mornings anew. There was a palpable change in every one of us, an impromptu movement driven by shared mindfulness that rippled through our tight-knit circle. With laughter echoing through the early hours and stories unfolding over steaming mugs, I witnessed a blossoming camaraderie and intimacy rekindled. And so, the life hack I once hesitated to share morphed into something far grander, an experience that encouraged vulnerability, creativity, and warmth and redefined the essence of connection among ourselves and others. In this beautiful harmonic dance of shared morning moments, we wove our own intricate narrative, revealing the most poignant truth of all: sometimes secrets hold power, but freely shared wisdom holds even more. As I sit here now, bathed in the dawn's tender light, I no longer hoard the essence of my early mornings but celebrate with gratitude the community it nurtured, filled with the promise of new beginnings, like the sun that rises each day. And as I write this reflection, quietly surrendering to sleep, I know I've opened a door not just to myself but to others' unique journeys, each sunrise a reminder that some treasures are meant to be shared, forever reshaping the lives of those around us. As the first hints of daylight filtered through my window, casting soft shadows on the walls, I felt a profound tranquility settle over me, a quiet understanding of how interconnected our experiences can be. It had been months since I chose to share my secret, a life hack that had transformed my mornings and inadvertently, my relationships. It started as a small confession on a Reddit thread, tagged under Ask Reddit, where users opened up about their favorite secrets and life hacks. My comment had been simple: I wake up an hour earlier than everyone else, and it's changed my life. Of course, I hadn't anticipated the ripple effect it would create. I expected a few nods of agreement, perhaps some disbelief at how such a minor change could yield significant results. But the floodgates opened, and I was caught in a tidal wave of responses. People shared their stories of early mornings, how they found peace in a world that often felt chaotic, how sacred the stillness was compared to the rush of the day to come. At first, I felt a tinge of vulnerability, exposing my personal routine to a community of strangers. Would they understand? Was I laying claim to a secret that was too trivial to be meaningful? But the responses flooded in, each one echoing thoughts I had quietly held inside. Stories of newfound hobbies developed in those quiet hours, like painting or journaling, flourished alongside the feelings of guilt and joy many expressed about wanting more time to themselves before diving into the responsibilities of life. Slowly, I realized that my early mornings were akin to an unpolished gem, and by sharing my experience, I had opened a treasure chest full of kindness and connection. As I engaged with the community, a gentle rhythm emerged through our exchanges. People were inspired to wake earlier not just to chase dreams but to embrace silence, to savor coffee while contemplating their lives before the world's demands encroached on their time. Some created morning routines with family, turning what was once a solitary practice into a bonding experience. Reading through their accounts felt like stealing snippets of colorful lives, weaving my narrative into theirs, forming a tapestry of collective growth. I recall a comment from a woman named Sarah, who shared how incorporating this life hack reignited her marriage. They began waking up together, sharing soft conversations in the bleak morning light that often devolved into earnest laughter, ineffably transforming their relationship. There was another user, an older gentleman, who revealed he attended to his garden during those early quiet moments, nurturing life in a different sense, finding solace in the blooming flowers that awaited him as the world awoke. Yet, beneath the exchanges of inspiration lay something deeper, a shared understanding that life holds profound beauty in stillness. With each story that unfolded, I felt the walls I had unknowingly built around myself begin to fracture. I had always been one to enjoy my solitude, scavenging for pockets of time to breathe before buzzing phones and demanding schedules came crashing in. And perhaps I had feared that opening those sacred doors would lead to chaos and noise, leeching away the personal serenity I had so cherished. But as strangers opened their hearts in response to my simple revelation, I realized how wrong I had been. As the comments continued flowing in, I decided to organize an early morning meetup in our local park. It felt like an uncharted venture, but curious optimism thrived within me. To my surprise, dozens of people showed up, some I recognized by their usernames, others who I would only know for that brief moment in time. We gathered like old friends at the edge of a sprawling green oasis, a burgeoning community nurtured by the dawn's embrace. With coffee in hand and sleepy smiles on our faces, we shared our stories, forging connections I hadn't considered possible. Every cup raised was a toast not just to transformation but to the unity of our shared humanity, scratches and bruises in varying degrees merging with triumphs that painted our lives. Days turned into weeks, and as the seasons changed, so did our meetings. Some mornings we'd delve into reflective mindfulness exercises or guided meditation, others were filled with laughter and shared breakfast picnics. I noticed people blooming in ways they had never anticipated. Friendships emerged, and collaborations formed outside of our gathering. One morning, as I inhaled the scent of fresh pastries baking in the sun, I marveled at how this simple life hack had reshaped not only my routine but the essence of so many lives intertwined with mine. Looking back now, those early mornings were more than just a clever trick, they were an invitation to vulnerability, revealing the subtle art of connection and the beauty of shared existence. As I finally closed my eyes in surrender to sleep, I allow the memory of those gathered faces to wash over me, a gentle lullaby assuring me that life, in all its complexities, is best lived together. In the silence that follows, I reflect on the responsibilities we hold, not just to ourselves, but to each other. Some mornings I still wake to the solitude I cherish, but now, they carry the warmth of a community that blossomed from a single whisper of truth, with the promise to continually evolve. And as dawn breaks, I remember that sharing treasures can illuminate the depth of life's experiences across the vast tapestry of humanity, each thread woven intimately yet distinctively into a grand narrative of our existence. There was a time when every evening was filled with laughter and warmth. I would return from work to the delightful scent of a home-cooked meal, the soft glow of candlelight, and my partner Riley, who greeted me with a hug that seemed to melt my stress away. For the first few years of our marriage, we relished our shared passion for cooking, often experimenting with new recipes or recreating beloved dishes from our childhoods. I was content, and my jeans fit just right, but as life often does, it tilted on its axis. It wasn't an overnight shift, more like a slowly creeping shadow, but over the span of a year, I found myself caught in a web of unexpected challenges. It began with Riley's demanding promotion at work, which came with longer hours and increased stress. I admired their resolve but found myself lonely in the evenings, eating alone more often than not. I'd started to raid the pantry, the fun of cooking fading as every meal alone felt progressively more like a chore. I justified my choices, telling myself it was just a phase, a temporary solace in the constant churn of responsibility. But then came the unwanted comfort of takeout, when all I wanted was to escape the silence of an empty house. A greasy box of fried rice or a cheesy pizza became the remedy, the only companion in my solitude. Strangely, I believe the more I indulged, the more I'd drown out the loneliness. The evenings that once blossomed into intimate dinners turned into binge-watching sessions filled with sugary snacks, deep into the night. I realized I was gaining weight not just from the food itself but from the emotional layers I layered in each slice of pizza or scoop of ice cream, a way of filling the void in my heart. Watching the numbers climb on the scale was sobering yet surreal, like looking at a stranger in the mirror. And yet, when I tried to confide in Riley, worried that my habits were outside the bounds of what we once shared, the truth felt more fragile than ever. They'd flash a quick smile, a fleeting appreciation for my vulnerability, but I could sense an undercurrent of discomfort in their eyes, as if the weight of my struggle only added to theirs. Our conversations turned less frequent, skirting around the budding tension we were both too scared to address. I was caught in a tug-of-war between wanting to reclaim my health and fearing the laughter would fade into something unrecognizable if I laid bare my reality. The sinking feeling in my stomach grew until one evening Riley returned home, their face crumpled with exhaustion from a long day. I had prepared a lavish dinner in a last-ditch effort to recover our connection, but instead of delight, I saw concern flaring in their hazel eyes. They asked gently but deeply, "Are you okay?" I crumbled before them, admitting how I felt engulfed by the weight of my habits, my loneliness, how I felt like I was disappearing into an identity I never intended to embody. The air shifted as if we both let go of our unspoken fears. There were tears and hard truths, but ultimately, we committed to each other to navigate this twisted path together, seeking joy in preparation and balance. In time, we resurrected our kitchen adventures, discovering new recipes that both invigorated our bodies and revived the lightness in our hearts. Neither of us is exactly where we want to be, but we've learned to be patient with ourselves and each other, holding our stories together without judgment, whispering those bittersweet confessions in the quiet of our home, wrapped in warmth and rediscovered laughter. I want to believe that the weight of this journey, both the loss and the gain, will continue to weave lessons that draw us closer. If you've ever wondered how to love during the struggle, look beyond the numbers, my friend, and perhaps you will find the heart of the matter. Update: a few months have passed since that vulnerable night. Our journey took a turn towards wellness, not only physically, but emotionally as well. The weight on the scale has lessened, but what matters more is the weight of connection we've chosen to carry as a team. Riley and I have started to volunteer at a local food bank together every Saturday morning, finding joy in nourishing others while nurturing our relationship. I've learned that each step away from solitude into partnership creates a new recipe for resilience. There's magic in the connection, often unequaled by anything on a plate. If anything, those greasy takeout meals have evolved into afternoons sharing a picnic in the local park, filled with vibrant salads and hearty laughter that echoed into the sky. On those warm Saturday mornings, as the sun spilled golden light over the bustling activity of the food bank, I would often pause amidst the steady rhythm of packing and distributing meals to truly appreciate the moment. Riley and I would work side by side, our hands moving deftly through the boxes of food, exchanging soft smiles and laughter that seemed to wrap around us like a comforting blanket. It was during these hours of service that I discovered a newfound joy. It wasn't just a weekly chore, but a transformative experience that gradually unraveled the tightly wound complexities of the past. Every grain of rice we separated, every can of beans we packed, felt like a step away from the weight I once carried alone. I could see the glint of determination in Riley's eyes, and it ignited a spark within me. This wasn't just about shedding the physical weight I had accumulated but rather about lightening the emotional burden that had followed me for so long. In those reflective moments, I recalled those late nights, trapped in the cycle of mindless eating and isolation, where food served as a reluctant companion during my bouts of loneliness. I had never truly grasped how my relationship with food mirrored my relationship with people. Unable and unwilling to connect, I threw myself into self-indulgence. Yet here we were, Riley's hand brushing against mine as we shared stories of childhood memories tied to family dinners, laughter spilling out like the plentiful boxes of food surrounding us. It was a different kind of feast, sharing our vulnerabilities and dreaming of brighter futures over plates filled not just with vibrant salads but with hope and intention. As summer began to paint the park with lush hues of green, we found ourselves more inclined to leave the comfort of our home-cooked meals behind in favor of leisurely afternoons beneath the rustling trees. There was something so liberating about laying down the picnic blanket and unpacking lunch, free of the stress that once accompanied food. We had taken to experimenting with healthy recipes together, and the process itself became an adventure. We would stroll through the local farmer's market, picking out ripe avocados and fresh herbs, savoring the air laced with the aroma of baked bread and blooming flowers. Our shared experiences began to nourish us in ways I hadn't anticipated. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling week of work for both of us, I felt the familiar pang of anxiety creep in. I had stepped on the scale only to find a number I hadn't seen in a long while, and though I had tried to shake it off, the weight of that digit hung in the air, threatening to overshadow the joy I felt with Riley. I found myself retreating inward, worry spiraling like a whirlpool, and I could sense the change. Riley, ever perceptive, noticed my silence during a picnic, my mind racing with comparisons, doubts, and a precarious sense of failure. "Hey," Riley said softly, pulling a cluster of cherry tomatoes from our spread, "what's going on in that head of yours?" The concern in their voice snapped me back like a rubber band against skin. I hesitated, but the gentle nudging of their understanding eyes coaxed the truth out of me. I stepped on the scale. "I don't know how I feel about it," I whispered, the vulnerability stirring a wave of unease in my chest. To my surprise, Riley didn't dismiss my worry. Instead, they shifted closer, inputting warmth and acceptance into a moment where I might have anticipated judgment. "It's okay to feel that way. But remember the journey we're on. It's not about the numbers. We're doing this together. And in that exchange, something shifted. For the first time, I realized that Riley wasn't just my anchor but my partner. There was an intertwining of our struggles and triumphs that made the journey so much richer. As we shared our fears and insecurities beneath the dappled sunlight, I found comfort in the shared humanity of struggles. Facing the truths laid bare, I understood that weight comes not just from the body but from the emotional baggage that clings to us. With every heartfelt conversation, every laugh shared over a simple meal, we were queuing up all those intricate layers of connection that overshadowed the fleeting discomfort of a number on a scale. As autumn approached, we made it a point to continue our tradition. Every weekend, we would dig deeper into treasured recipes, while each meal crafted blossomed with discovery and meaning. I transitioned to viewing food as a source of connection, establishing routines that nurtured not just our bodies, but also the bonds that fortified our hearts. The idea of weight shifted entirely. It morphed into a celebration of resilience, companionship, and perhaps most importantly, the magic of transformation. An update on our story came when Riley surprised me one early Saturday morning with a phone call. "Hey, I've got an idea that could spice things up for our volunteering." Their voice held excitement, and curiosity swirled within me as I listened. "What if we organized a community cook-off at the food bank? We can involve everyone we've met, share recipes, culture, and celebrate food as we have, but on a larger scale, allowing them a chance to share their stories too." A thrill of ideas cascaded within me. Naturally, I threw myself into the project with gusto, helping to plan out details and gather ingredients. So, when the day finally arrived, a sense of pride bloomed within me as I watched the community come together, laughter echoing in the harvested sunlight, stories flowing as flowingly as the various dishes that filled each table. Riley and I exchanged satisfied glances amidst the fray, our hands gripping tightly as we relished this moment that seemed to signify a milestone in our journey, a festival committed to connection, nurtured through the ingredients of love, support, and resilience. I realized the true measure of weight isn't found on a scale, but in the richness of relationships we foster along the way. It's in the laughter that resonates in our memories and the connections that nourish our deepest selves, an intricate tapestry woven together one experience at a time. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the bustling festival grounds, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the path Riley and I had carved out together. The laughter of children spun joyfully in the air, drifting past the aromatic stalls filled with local produce, arts, and crafts. It was a community united in celebration, where each vendor wore a smile as bright as the colors of their wares. I couldn't help but breathe deeply, taking in the savory scents wafting from the food stalls, barbecue smoke mingling with sweet notes of freshly baked pastries. With every passing moment, I savored not just the comforting flavors that tasted of home, but also the warmth of Riley's hand in mine, our fingers interlaced like the vines wrapping around the nearby oak trees. When we made our way over to a small booth selling homemade jam, the elderly woman behind the counter welcomed us with a twinkling smile. Her hands were calloused yet gentle as she showed us the vibrant labels, each depicting a different fruit imbued with stories of sun-soaked days and summer whispers. "This one's made from the first strawberries of spring," she said, her voice nostalgic as she handed us a small sample. As we tasted the sweet spread, I could see Riley's face light up, and in that moment, I was reminded of how far we had come, how filling our lives with love and connection was beginning to replace the emptiness that once sat heavy in my own heart. After a leisurely stroll through the festival, we settled on a patch of grass beneath a sprawling sycamore tree, its branches offering a comforting canopy. Riley unpacked our homemade picnic, a collection of vibrant salads and hearty sandwiches, all crafted from ingredients we had picked up together at the food bank's community garden. The sun filtered through the leaves, dappled light playing on our faces as we shared bites and stories, laughter spilling between us like an uncontainable river. "You know," Riley began, crossing her legs beneath her, "it's strange to think how food used to connect us in a different way, isn't it? I remember all the late-night takeout and how it was always more about escaping the day than really celebrating anything." I nodded, understanding all too well how those nights were often marked by solitude and the clinking of takeout containers rather than warmth and conversation. "Yeah," I replied softly, "it's almost like we used food to fill the spaces we didn't know how to navigate emotionally." We were both silent for a moment, the hum of festival laughter in the distance grounding us as we processed those feelings. It was liberating to acknowledge our past without letting it define us. Riley reached out and placed her palm on my cheek, bringing my gaze back to her. "But look at us now, creating new memories, giving new meaning to those moments. That's what it's about, right? learning to nourish ourselves in every sense of the word. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of hope and determination, emboldening me to step further into this newfound journey with her. With dusk settling in, the festival exploded to life with flickering lights strung across the trees, illuminating the path of laughter and connection all around us. We moved from stall to stall, sharing bites of gourmet grilled cheese and sipping on fresh apple cider as the sky transformed into a canvas of purples and blues. Every moment felt imbued with the lessons we had learned, the importance of intentionally, of savoring not just food but the quiet magic woven into relationships. And in that bustling atmosphere, it dawned on me just how much I had been missing, how easy it had been to get lost in my own solitude, yet how deeply transformative it was to lay aside old habits and embrace vulnerability. As we leaned against each other on a bench, our bellies full and hearts even fuller, I knew that this was just the beginning. In my heart, I felt a shift, an understanding that life was not just about the meals we shared but also the people who enriched those moments, who brought flavor and vibrancy to the everyday. Our journey together echoed the very essence of a bustling market, a beautiful blend of the familiar and the unexplored, the laughter of a newfound connection taking center stage in our lives. Later, as the sounds of the festival faded and the stars twinkled brightly above, I came to realize that the joy of our partnership would continue to thrive. I turned to Riley. "I can't imagine doing this without you. This feels too right." She smiled, leaning in closer, the warmth of her body providing both comfort and strength as she whispered, "We're in this together, always." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in, a vow of sorts, echoing the harmony we had woven into our lives through love, resilience, and the steady rhythm of shared moments. The true measure of weight was indeed not confined to a scale, but rather the delightful burden of connection we carried, woven tightly with each experience we chose to embrace. There's a certain thrill that comes from the idea of having a carefree night in a wildly adventurous setting, free from the judgments of the everyday world, and I had always fantasized about what it would be like to be caught in a whirlwind romance with a stranger in an exotic locale. That thought lingered in the back of my mind for years, stoked by the countless movies I consumed and the endless stories floating through my social circles. But when I finally found the courage to act on one of my fantasies, I discovered the harsh realities lurking just beneath the surface. It all started when I moved to a new city after college, where everything felt fresh and full of promise. I had just landed a new job that required frequent travel, mostly to glamorous destinations, and one night in Barcelona, after a long day of meetings, I decided to embrace the moment. The warm night air was alive with music and laughter, and I was drawn into a crowded bar pulsating with energy. There, I met him, a charismatic artist with a mischievous glint in his eye and an accent that made my knees weak. He was everything my fantasies had promised, charming, spontaneous, and utterly intoxicating. We danced under the low lights, sharing stories that wove our lives together while the world faded around us. I felt alive for the first time in ages, intoxicated not just by the sangria but by the possibility that I was shedding my mundane reality for something vibrant and exhilarating. As the night deepened, he leaned in closer, whispering promises of adventure and intimacy. I could feel the tension sparking between us, a magnetic pull that made my heart race. Finally, in a haze of desire, we left the bar together, stumbling through dimly lit streets towards the nearest hotel, our laughter echoing off the cobblestones. But as the dawn broke over the city, the fantasy began to unravel. The morning light highlighted the disarray of my choice, and the artist wasn't the smooth romantic I'd pictured. His carefree facade slipped as he started talking about his commitments, his art, and his struggles with mental health. I felt the heavy weight of reality settle over us like a thick fog. Instead of a wild escape, I found myself in a deep discussion that made me acutely aware of the fragility of our encounter. I wanted to run, but there was compassion bubbling within me, urging me to listen and be present, and I struggled with the genuine connection contrasting starkly with the idealized moment I'd envisioned. I felt a rush of panic as I realized that this whirlwind had become a wave threatening to drown me. I was falling for the man behind the fantasy, not just the figure in my dreams, and as we talked, I was faced with the choice of whether to embrace this new reality or cling to the illusion of a carefree evening. Ultimately, I chose connection over escapism. We shared our fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities, and while we parted ways at noon, exchanging hesitant smiles and promises to keep in touch, I was left contemplating the nature of my fantasy and the truth we often overlook. Reflecting on that night, I realized that sometimes fantasies are not merely about pleasure or thrill, they can reveal deeper truths about ourselves, our yearnings for connection, understanding, and shared experience. I returned home feeling both liberated and unsettled, admiring how life rarely unfolds according to our plans. I don't think I'll ever forget him or the raw authenticity of our meeting. A few months later, I received a message from him, a simple "How are you?" followed by a photo of a new painting he'd created, something he claimed was inspired by our conversation. I smiled, knowing that the reality was so much richer than the fantasy, and wondered how many others were out there, living in the shadows of their own dreams. As I reflected on that night, I felt a sense of warmth, realizing that it wasn't a nightmare but a beautiful awakening, one that taught me to cherish the imperfections that make life so compelling. The days turned into weeks, and our exchanges evolved into something more profound. Each message from him felt like a gentle ripple in the still waters of my life, nudging me awake from the humdrum routine I had settled into. We shared fragments of our worlds, documenting every laugh, every desire, and every brush of vulnerability that came alive in our conversations. I began to look forward to our nightly chats, my heart dancing at the thought of unveiling the layers of his mind, and I started weaving him into my dreams. The reality was intoxicating, contrasting sharply with the fantasies I had once indulged in, where everything was steamy and perfect, a performance crafted to delight. This was different, it was raw and authentic, filled with the potential for connection and depth rather than mere physical encounters. There was a kind of magic in the imperfections that crept into our exchanges, like when I stumbled over my words, or he shared a painting that seemed incomplete, an echo of whispers and lines that spoke loudly, but lacked the finish and polish I had envisioned. One evening, during one of our lengthy dialogues, I felt the urge to broach the subject of reality. I wanted to tread carefully, though, knowing how easily dreams can shatter under the weight of expectations. "What do you think about exploring our fantasies further?" I typed, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send, the question hanging in the digital air between us like a conversation held at a cafe, the scent of coffee and pastries wafting around us. I braced myself. Would he take it as a playful suggestion, or would he see it for what it was, a gentle nudge toward the frayed edges of reality? His reply came quicker than I anticipated, a simple "I've thought about it too. But part of me fears losing what we have." Those words echoed in my mind for days. We were treading on a precipice, hovering between the perfect fantasy we had built and the genuine connection that was blossoming. Part of me wanted to dive headfirst into the chaos of it all, to explore every nuance of our desires, to drunk press those fantasies into reality. But another part of me clung desperately to the warmth and safety of our words. What if the tangibility of our dreams bled the colors out of what was already vivid? The notion of it being a nightmare replayed in my thoughts. It was so easy to dance around the idea of passion when it was wrapped tightly in the cocoon of screens and distance. But what if when stripped bare, the reality fell flat, an unfinished painting revealed under the hard light of day? Eventually, after scribbling tentative messages in my mind, I took a deep breath and pressed forward. "What do you want to see happen?" The question was a leap into the unknown, and I felt lighter yet heavier with the weight of it. I wondered if I caught a hint of hesitation in his response, a flicker of uncertainty that made my heart race and pulse thud against my chest. "I want to get to know the real you, beyond the words," he wrote, and I felt an overwhelming warmth spread within me, a craving that stretched beyond mere physicality. Weeks passed. Our dialogues traversed the spectrum of feelings, ranging from innocent musings on artistic inspiration to deep dives into the intricacies of commitment. We lost ourselves in stories of past loves, future dreams, and those midnight confessions that spilled out like secrets beneath the stars. Yet, I sensed a contention hanging over us, a question we were avoiding. I could almost hear it, that whisper of destiny. What would it mean to turn this cartoonish dream of skinny dipping in a warm ocean into a picturesque illusion? And then, one rainy evening in late autumn, a soft invitation came nudging into my inbox. "How about meeting in person?" The proposition shimmered before me like the glow of an uncertain flame, and I found myself grinning, then quickly frowning. My heart raced, anticipation clawing at my insides. Could I step into the canvas we'd painted together, or was that the moment when everything would dissolve? I could almost see it, the fantasy stretching out like a beautiful, uncharted horizon before me, pulling me in, while simultaneously pushing me away with the heavy weight of reality. Days of contemplation curled around me like smoke, each twist and turn of thought compelling me onward until I had crafted a response that both terrified and thrilled me. Yes. It hung in my mind like a fragile spell, one word laden with promise and dread. We settled on a small art gallery nestled on the quiet outskirts of town, a space drenched in creative energy, where the paintings were lively, and the atmosphere felt ethereal, scattering the lingering doubts like scattered leaves in the wind. The day of our meeting arrived, and 1,000 butterflies danced in my stomach as I entered the gallery, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the smells of rain and warming spices. The initial thrill fluttering in my chest was marred with a thick layer of apprehension. Would we get lost in each other's eyes, or was I stepping into an awkward situation destined to slip back into the shadows? But then I saw him, standing just beneath a sprawling canvas, blue in swirls of deeper hues that echoed the depths of my mind. Our eyes met, and the world faded into a quiet hum. The moment was surreal, bursting with an intensity I had not anticipated. We spent those hours enveloped in conversation, laughter echoing in the small space. I shared thoughts on art, he chuckled at my nervous stumbles, and for every word we exchanged, I felt the invisible thread tying us draw tighter. We painted a new story together, one that was only beginning to emerge from the canvas of our dreams, no longer constrained by the pixels that had connected us. When our hands brushed, I felt warm currents of electricity. It was clear that we were both aware of the tightrope we walked above an abyss of uncertainty, but the magic of the moment kept us tethered. As the evening wound down and twilight seeped into the gallery, we stepped outside, the world outside appearing softer, illuminated under the gentle glow of street lamps. A wave of real, tangible affection washed over me, fueling the moment with a quiet, electrifying promise. There was no fantasy tearing at the seams, no crumbling reality demanding attention. Just two people taking a chance, creating a story marked not by the typical markers of romance or lust, but by the foundations of honesty and friendship. Months later, I lay in bed, replaying the memories of his laughter and our first meaningful kiss, still enveloped in the sweetness of that night. What could have easily devolved into a nightmare instead turned into the core of a thriving journey, one that transformed our shared dreams into a fragile reality, delicate yet beautiful. With every shared moment and vulnerability, we crafted a version of ourselves that was, and always would be, infinitely richer than anything I had found before, reminding me that sometimes it's the unpredictable chaos of life that blooms into the kind of connection we often yearn for in our fantasies. And as I drifted off to sleep, I allowed the bittersweet wonder of it all to embrace me. In the quiet chambers of my mind, shadows of the past faded, replaced with the whispers of dreams yet to be realized, knowing fully that those fantasies, when touched by honesty, could morph into something stunningly, satisfyingly real. That night marked a turning point in my life, each thought spiraling gracefully into the next as I imagined the small changes I could embrace. I often found myself daydreaming about our conversation, the flow of ideas, the laughter interwoven with vulnerability. It became a tapestry of emotions that I would revisit on quiet evenings when the world outside dimmed into a soft glow. I replayed his words, the way he spoke about art and humanity. Folding my own little insecurities into the fabric of our connection, feeling a sense of permission to embrace my chaotic self. Days turned into weeks, and it astonished me how something so serendipitous could linger like the taste of a fine wine, warm and intoxicating. Every text he sent painted another layer in my mind, a canvas I didn't know I had, each exchange revealing the raw essence of two souls entangled in shared dreams. I began to see my life differently. Instead of the linear paths I had always walked, I found myself wandering into serendipitous alleys of adventure and self-discovery. Then, one evening, as rain drizzled softly against my window panes, my phone buzzed with a familiar rhythm. It was him again, this time asking if I'd like to see his latest exhibit, a showcase he had planned for months in a quaint gallery downtown. My heart raced at the thought. Compared to the previous vague illusions of intimacy through our screens, this was a real-world challenge, a shift from fantasy to reality, a chance to interact beyond the confines of our carefully curated words. I hesitated, nervous about stepping out of my comfort zone. What if we encountered the rawness of existence that often lay beyond the realm of our beautiful exchanges? What if it didn't measure up, shattering the soft cocoon we had spun around each other? But the allure of authenticity won the battle within, and I found myself standing before the gallery a few days later, curiosity blooming inside me as I entered the softly lit space. Colors danced on the walls, each painting embodying a story I hadn't lived, but could feel resonating deep within my heart. And there he was, standing proud amidst his canvases, a mix of nervousness and passion radiating from him like a beacon. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, the world around us faded. It was just the two of us, our connection flourishing amidst the strokes of paint and splashes of color. As we navigated through his works, he explained the inspiration behind each piece, his passion electric. I shared my thoughts too, hesitant but emboldened by the beauty around us and the contrast of our conversations that had now grown into something palpable. Yet, amidst the joy of discovery, I noticed a peculiar unease creeping in, a recognition of the thin line we were treading between fantasy and our very real lives. Suddenly, the idealistic images I had conjured up began to waver, revealing the intricacies of human connection that were not always as simple as they appeared in my dreams. It happened during a soft, spontaneous laugh shared over one of his more abstract pieces, which to me seemed chaotic and whimsical, yet to him symbolized the emotional wreckage of lost love and anger. In that moment, the laughter curdled slightly, revealing glimpses of his real-world complexity. As he bore his soul, shadows flickered in his eyes, hints of struggles and disappointments that his art had masked until now. The fantasy I had wrapped around him of the flawless artist who could lead me into a world painted with sunshine, began to reveal a semblance of darkness that mirrored my own. Feeling a rush of vulnerability, I opened up too, speaking of my own tribulations, the tightrope of expectations holding me hostage in my own life. As the evening unfolded, the layers of our conversations peeled back, leaving room for honesty but also a sense of hesitance, an unsteady dance of vulnerability that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Our connection deepened that night but was underscored by the ever-present reminder of our fears and insecurities, that perhaps the very beauty we sought was intertwined with the truths we often shied away from. And finally, as we exited the gallery, the gentle rain had morphed into a light drizzle, cascading down like whispered confessions. Walking side by side without a clear destination, I realized it was okay to embrace the unknown, finding solace in the warmth of his presence. The night felt alive, charged with the potential for shared dreams but also the weight of reality pressing down on us. As we reached a quiet park, the moonlight spilled across the grass, illuminating a space where we could stand still for a moment, allowing the hum of the city to fade into the background. I turned to look at him, and in the silent exchange, I understood. The beauty of our connection was not in the idealized fantasies we had conjured, but in the intricacies, the messiness of our truths intertwined. This wasn't a neatly wrapped story, it was still unfolding, an exquisite blend of highs and lows living in the breath between our words. As I lay in bed that night, the echoes of our conversation lingered, a tapestry woven from threads of joy, fear, longing, and relief. No longer was I drifting off to sleep solely wrapped in thoughts of unrealized fantasies. Instead, I was cradled by the promise of an authentic journey ahead, one where nightmares didn't hold dominion over my dreams. In that acceptance, amidst the cacophony of life's beautiful chaos, I felt free. The stars outside shone brightly, as if nodding along to my revelations, and I surrendered to sleep, secure in the knowledge that every moment was a brushstroke on the canvas of my life, exactly as it was meant to be. There's a certain hush that blankets the world when the clock strikes midnight, a stillness that feels both serene and unsettling, and it's during one of these quiet moments that I found myself grappling with the choices that led me to the life I now lead. My name is Mark, and I earned over $10,000 a month designing immersive virtual environments for high-stakes clients, yet beneath this carefully crafted facade of success lay a tangled web of anxiety and regret. It wasn't always like this, of course. Years ago, I was just another dreamer plodding through an uninspiring 9-to-5, my hopes neatly tucked into the corners of my modest cubicle, dreaming of escape. It was during one of those soul-sucking days that I first stumbled upon an online forum where people shared the secrets of their financial success. Ask Reddit for those earning over $10,000 per month, what do you do for a living to achieve that income? The title read, and in a moment of reckless curiosity, I clicked, devouring the tales of entrepreneurs who had transformed their passions into thriving careers. Inspired, I spent the next 2 years building an online presence, experimenting tirelessly with design until I finally landed my first big client, a tech startup working to revolutionize virtual reality for training simulations. My life shifted overnight. I moved out of my cramped apartment into a sleek downtown loft, relishing the attention and validation that came from my newfound lifestyle. But soon after the novelty wore off, whispers of doubt crept into my mind, late nights hunched over my screen, a carousel of client demands, and the pressure to maintain an image of success turned my triumph into a mundane cycle of anxiety. All I could think about was whether I was truly happy or merely living a facade of fulfillment, and the divide between my desires and my reality grew deeper. One evening, while preparing for another video call with a particularly demanding client, I overheard my neighbor, Sarah, talking in animated tones about her plans to quit her corporate job and start her own baking business. It was unpredictable, unstable, yet the fervor in her voice was palpable, filling the hallway with passion, something I hadn't felt in months. I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy and nostalgia. Her pursuit of happiness felt genuine, unlike the hollow satisfaction my success seemed to offer. As I lay in bed that night, the glow of my monitor casting a bluish hue across the room, I felt a wave of self-doubt wash over me, culminating in a gnawing question: was the money really worth it? Unable to shake that lingering thought, I resolved to confront my reality. The very next morning, I reached out to Sarah and, over coffee, shared my journey, confessing my admiration for her liberating choice. We talked for hours, bonding over our dreams and fears, and by the end of the conversation, an idea sparked in my mind. What if I started a side project, perhaps a collaborative digital art installation that combined both our talents? I could provide the technical expertise while she infused the narrative with warmth and connection. It wouldn't be about the income but the joy of creativity and collaboration. The following weeks were transformative. As I chipped away at this new project, the excitement coursed through me like electricity. I felt invigorated as I would work late into the night, not because I had to, but because I chose to, and my perspective began to shift. My clients noticed my renewed passion as well. My work improved and the projects became less of a burden and more of a form of expression. The joy that emanated from the collaboration poured into other aspects of my life, rekindling friendships and bringing more laughter into my home. Although my monthly earnings fluctuated, I found a new balance that transcended money. The culmination of our joint project was both daunting and exhilarating, a site unveiling at a gallery downtown, a breathtaking journey through virtual landscapes inspired by personal stories of transformation. As our visitors wandered through the exhibit, hearing heartfelt narratives interwoven with the stunning visuals, I realized I had found a new purpose, one that didn't solely hinge on financial success. I've learned that fulfillment isn't defined by a dollar amount, but rather by the connections we forge and the passion we nurture. In retrospect, it's the vibrant tapestry of life experiences that we weave together, and sometimes, stepping off the beaten path is the best decision we could ever make. Update: since the exhibit, I've decided to take on fewer clients, focusing on projects that truly resonate with me while nurturing this new creative venture with Sarah. Together, we're exploring deeper collaboration while offering workshops for aspiring artists and business owners. My income is more modest now, but I feel richer in ways that surpass money. My life has become a canvas painted with vibrant colors I never knew I could create. Every day since I made that shift, I revel in waking up with the sun slanting gently through the window, illuminating the room in soft golden hues. My mornings have transformed from hastily throwing on clothes and mentally running through deadlines to slow, balanced rituals that awaken my senses. I brew a cup of rich, dark coffee, inhaling that earthy aroma that has become a comforting staple in my life. I often catch myself standing on the balcony, coffee in hand, taking in the serene beauty of the world around me, the rustle of leaves in a light breeze, the quiet chatter of birds, and sometimes even the distant laughter of children playing in a nearby park. This tranquility serves as the perfect backdrop for my thoughts, allowing my creative juices to flow in ways they haven't for far too long. I think back to the days when money felt like the only measure of success and wonder how I let myself forget the true joy of creation. Sarah's energy is truly infectious. We spend hours brainstorming, sketching ideas in our notebooks, and cracking open a bottle of wine late in the evenings to give life to our shared dreams. With each passing day, collaborating with her feels less like work and more like a coming together of two souls who genuinely understand one another, each having transcended the limits our previous careers imposed on us. The workshops we've started have been nothing short of magical. Watching aspiring artists and business owners learn from our experiences and find their own voices is fulfilling in ways I had never anticipated. Each session is filled with laughter, creativity, and a shared commitment to drive our passions forward, and I'm beginning to see the glimmers of their potential reflected back at me. The energy in the room is palpable, tinged with a sense of mutual growth and encouragement, a space devoid of judgment where creativity flourishes. I vividly remember a participant shared how she had been too afraid to pursue her artistic inclinations for years, feeling trapped by society's expectations. When she finally unveiled her painting, tears streamed down her face, not just from relief, but from the dawning realization that she had the right to express herself fully. That moment struck a chord deep within me, reinforcing my decision to step away from the frenetic rush of my previous life. I can hardly believe how far I've come, both personally and professionally. Sure, the financial stability I used to enjoy has been replaced by a more modest existence, but the richness I experience now is found in the moments made of laughter, creativity, and vulnerability. I've learned to redefine what it means to feel fulfilled. It's more layered and genuine than I ever imagined. Evenings have taken on a new rhythm. Often, I'll find myself cozied up on the couch, wrapped in a warm blanket, feeling grateful as I share stories or brainstorm ideas with Sarah. Sometimes we stay silent, simply enjoying each other's presence, letting our thoughts intermingle as the day slowly fades into night, sprinkled with stars that shine like dreams waiting to be realized. It's a raw, honest reflection of where I am now, and looking back seems almost alien compared to the internal freedom I feel. In the quiet, my mind often wanders to those early days of my transition, where I felt a cacophony of uncertainty swirling in my head. There's that small part of me that occasionally whispers doubts, wondering if I should be chasing after clients again or regretting my slower, more intentional pace. But then I remind myself, this is where the real treasure lies. I reconnect with that vibrant sense of purpose. The voice that once drowned under the chaos has returned, more robust than before. It tells me to trust the process, that fulfillment won't be measured by one's bank account but by the lives I touch, including my own, that stepping off the beaten path is not merely a reluctant retreat, but rather a brave journey into the wilderness of possibility. A little part of me even wonders if I could ever go back. I feel like a bird that's finally taken flight, feeling the exhilarating rush of wind beneath my wings, and now, the thought of confinement is laughable. And while I acknowledge the practicalities of life, utility bills and groceries, there's an undercurrent of excitement that pulses through me at the thought of exploring all these new possibilities with Sarah. Together, we're embarking on more than just adventure, we're cultivating a community of dreamers and creatives, revitalizing the world around us as we push toward a shared vision. The fact that I am earning less doesn't feel like a loss, rather, it is an investment in a richer life, one that sings with authenticity and connection. As I lay in bed each night, I find comfort in knowing I have overcome the doubts that once clawed at my heart. Weaving the threads of passion and purpose into the fabric of our daily lives feels like the ultimate act of rebellion against the voices that once dictated what success should look like. The canvas of my life is expanding, and I look forward to the beautiful strokes that are yet to come, eager for tomorrow's sunrise and the promise of new beginnings it holds. As the days stretched into weeks, each morning felt like an invitation to paint my life anew. Mornings were no longer merely a ritual of waking and rushing, but rather cherished moments where I could savor a steaming cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into my palms while sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the wooden floors in soft golden hues. With Sarah by my side, our partnership blossomed both in art and in life. We crafted workshops that not only encouraged budding artists but also drew in small business owners eager to translate their passions into viable enterprises. There was something profoundly satisfying in sharing our knowledge, watching individuals rediscover their dreams, their eyes alight with the spark of possibility. One day, as we wrapped up another successful workshop, I noticed Clara, a quiet woman in her 40s, lingering behind. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her finished piece on the table, a vibrant painting that depicted a sunlit garden, reminiscent of her childhood home. The colors were bold and raw, each stroke bursting with unfiltered emotion. Approaching her, I could see the tears pooling in her eyes, reflecting a swirling mix of pride and vulnerability. "I haven't let myself paint in years," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I forgot what it felt like to create something that was just me." As she spoke, I realized how deeply our workshops touched lives beyond mere art. We were touching on the core of what it meant to be human. Feeling an overwhelming surge of empathy, I reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "You've unveiled something beautiful today," I replied, knowing that her creativity was not just a form of expression but a breakthrough, a return to a part of herself she'd hidden away. Interactions like these filled my heart with warmth, creating a bridge between those in the workshop and the artists we were becoming ourselves, breaking down the invisible walls of isolation we often feel in our journeys. Yet, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The transition from a high-earning career to one of modest income had its challenges, especially concerning my savings. I began watching my financial habits, trimming down on daily luxuries. Dinners out with friends turned into cozy potlucks, spontaneous weekend getaways became quiet hiking adventures, and my wardrobe shifted to a blend of artistic thrift finds. At first, I fought against the changes, courage challenging my fears, but I soon discovered that life offered deeper, more fulfilling experiences outside the bustling consumer world I'd once inhabited. One rainy evening, as I sat curled up in our studio, surrounded by brushes and canvases, I received a text from my old business partner, Greg. He wanted to meet up to discuss a collaboration on a project I'd once been a part of, one that had been lucrative but lacked passion. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps just the need to understand how my old life could intersect with my new, but I agreed. Our meeting was at a trendy cafe in town, the kind that thrummed with energy and sold overpriced coffee. As Greg walked in, a formally polished shadow of the creative I once knew, I felt conflicting emotions rush through me, nostalgia mixed with a hint of disappointment. "I've been meaning to tell you," he started, his gaze scanning the vibrant artworks hanging on the walls. "Your exhibit was different, Real. The compliment felt heavy, almost burdensome, a reminder of the crossroads I had danced between. It was all about authenticity, I replied softly, feeling a flicker of pride. We fell into routine conversation, yet beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of tension, the acknowledgement that we were no longer on the same pathway despite sharing a rich history. As Greg detailed his latest projects, I felt the distance between our definitions of success widen. The conversation turned to income as he casually mentioned, "You should consider coming back, Angela, you were always brilliant at landing high-paying clients." The suggestion hung heavy in the air, the implication swirling around us like a dark cloud. "I'm not sure I want that life anymore," I found myself saying, my heart racing at the sudden defiance. What good is high income without fulfillment? His expression tightened, and I watched as he struggled to understand, trapped in his corporate mentality. That evening, as I returned home, the warmth of my studio felt especially comforting. I knew this was where I belonged, where my spirit danced freely, unswayed by the binary metrics of success. In the following weeks, my resolve only strengthened. Clara returned to our workshops, her growth a small but significant testament to our collective purpose. The pieces we were crafting transcended the canvas, forming a community where passion wasn't measured in dollar signs but in authentic connections. As I lay down each night, the worries about finances certainly still lingered, but they grew quieter, overshadowed by the vibrant tapestry of newfound purpose in my life. I realized wealth truly resided not in bank accounts but in the moments we shared, laughter over a shared meal, the joyous shouts of a budding artist celebrating their first piece, or even the quiet contentment of painting side by side with a friend. And eventually, one evening as dusk settled, painting with Sarah in the fading light, I listened to her quiet humming, a simple melody so soothing, it seemed to weave itself around us like a shawl. She turned to me and smiled, and something in that moment clicked. The threads of our separate lives were intertwining, building a hopeful future filled with colors yet to come. Each night, as I drifted into sleep, I surrendered to the beauty of the unknown that awaited with the dawn, grateful for the shadows that led me here, confident that whatever lay ahead, I would continue to create my story one brushstroke at a time. The cold, flickering light of my laptop screen illuminated the dimly lit room, shadows dancing on the walls as I stared at the now infamous executive order on my feed: transgender and non-binary people don't exist. I could hardly believe what I was reading, a wave of disbelief crashing over me, followed by a torrent of emotions I hadn't expected to feel at that moment. As someone who had spent years transcribing the stories of marginalized individuals at a local nonprofit, the implications of such a declaration felt personal. It was as if someone had ripped the very fabric of my work apart. My closest friend, Jamie, had recently transitioned, finally embracing a truth that had been so long suppressed, and I wondered how this declaration affected someone who had only just begun to live authentically. The thought gnawed at me, an unsettling feeling, like a puzzle piece that refused to fit. I picked up my phone and scrolled through social media threads, seeing a mixture of anger, confusion, and sorrow expressed in every post, each one resonating like a silent scream echoing in my own heart. Circling back to Jamie, I could hardly contain my anxiety, so I decided to text him. The three little dots that signify someone is typing seemed to stretch into an eternity. When he finally replied, it was a simple, almost resigned acknowledgement of the order. "It's just another day in the circus, isn't it?" he wrote, an attempt at humor that dripped with bitterness. I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. I could imagine the weight of that moment and how it might feel to have an essential part of your identity dismissed outright. Trying to lift his spirits, I suggested we meet up for coffee, to talk through things. He agreed, and despite the heaviness of the situation, I felt a glimmer of hope at the thought of seeing him. When we met later that afternoon, the coffee shop was alive with the comforting buzz of conversation and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Jamie sat across from me, his eyes reflecting a mix of resilience and fragility. We chatted lightly at first, exchanging small talk about work and hobbies, but as the topic turned back to the order, a silence fell over us. "It's hard to reconcile," Jamie said, fingers dancing nervously on the edge of his cup. "On one hand, I'm me, unapologetically. But on the other, I see this powerful entity trying to erase that." I felt the lump in my throat, empathy flooding my senses as I carefully searched for the right words. "You exist, you matter," I insisted, passionate yet tender, feeling every bit of the weight behind those words. His quiet smile, tinged with sadness, warmed my heart, and for a moment, it felt like we were cocooned in our shared understanding, momentarily distanced from the chaos of the world outside. As the evening wore on, We found ourselves slowly piecing together feelings we hadn't quite found the words for before. Jamie spoke about his childhood, how he had always felt out of place, struggling against a tide of societal expectations that felt like a choking grip. Every day is like a battle, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I shared my own struggles with feeling helpless in the face of stigma, describing how I had often felt overpowered by the cacophony of voices in the world, all claiming what was real or not, blurring the lines of truth. A realization hit me: it wasn't just about this executive order, it was about every little moment people like us faced, a constant negotiation for validation in a world that seemed intent on silencing the very essence of who we are. Together, we found solace in the understanding that our narratives were still ours to share, that they could never truly be erased despite the weight of the world. As night fell and the coffee shop emptied, I noticed an overwhelming sense of relief settling in, a soft glow of unity as if we were both warriors, resilient in our truths. We spoke of activism and art, of community, of resilience, and as we laughed, I could see Jamie begin to reclaim his sense of self, his spark igniting against the darkness surrounding us. In the weeks that followed, I became more active online, amplifying voices that were often drowned out by fear and ignorance, while Jamie connected with local advocacy groups, launching a powerful dialogue within our community. One night, he sent me an article he had written about our conversation that day, detailing the resilience found in understanding and love. The comments flooded in, affirming not just his experience but the myriad of stories shared by others who felt invisible. It was liberating to see how art and conversation could combat the darkness, each supportive message shimmering like a beacon of truth. Reflecting on everything, I realized how deeply my worldview had shifted. I was still grappling with the news and its implications, but I was also steadfast in my belief that love and truth could circumvent even the most pervasive of lies. In those quiet nights typing away at the keyboard, I learned that we create our own existence through the stories we tell. Months passed, and while the executive order remained a haunting presence in the background, it faded into perspective, its power diminished by the resilience of those willing to tell their truths. I felt changed, my heart embraced a collective sense of purpose. The world had its challenges, yes, but it also contained countless stories woven together with threads of resilience and hope. As I wrote this final reflection, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, not just for Jamie's friendship, but for those who had spent so long fighting to be seen. Jamie had once told me that it was okay to be tired, but it was never okay to be silenced. I hoped he would always remember that as we continued to carve spaces for authenticity in a world trying so hard to stop us. Update: just last week, Jamie texted to say he received an invitation to speak at a community event focused on advocacy and the importance of representation. I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. He was stepping into a space that bore the shadows of so much doubt yet dared to shine brightly. He was realizing the power of his voice, and in that, all our stories mattered more than the outdated proclamations of those who dared to erase us. In the end, what we lived, what we fought for, would outshine any declarations made in cold executive chambers. It would linger in conversations and bold artistic expressions that could never be silenced. As the applause from the audience enveloped him like a warm embrace, I leaned back in my folding chair, allowing the echoes of his words to dance through my mind. My heart thumped steadily in my chest, a rhythmic reminder of the joyful chaos we had created here today. I was filled not only with pride for him, my partner in this journey, but also with a deep sense of purpose. Together, we had begun to weave a fabric of community, an intricate tapestry reflecting our diverse identities and the myriad experiences that shaped us. The vibrant colors of our lives blended seamlessly, carving out a space where our truths could flourish, away from the grayscale declarations imposed by those who could not begin to understand. It was hard to ignore the tension that still simmered beneath the surface, the whispers of doubt joining the chorus of applause. After all, we were living in a world where acceptance felt like a delicate dance on a precipice. When someone had first shared the news of the executive order at the last community meeting, my stomach had twisted into knots. It felt like a denouncement, a shadow looming over the progress we fought so hard to achieve. Although I held on to the notion that words could wield a power of their own, I couldn't help but feel the sting of uncertainty. Could we retain our collective voice in the face of erasure? More importantly, what could I do to keep that spirit alive, not just for my partner, but for every individual who had ever felt the suffocating weight of invisibility? As the event wound down, I caught up with my partner, his energy still radiant despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "Do you think we made a difference?" he asked, his brow furrowed as he played with the hem of his shirt, a telltale sign of his nerves surfacing. I placed my hand over his, squeezing gently, letting him know that I believed wholeheartedly that we had. Our voices, our stories, were bridges to understanding, and even if just one person left with a new perspective, it was worth every moment we spent preparing for this day. We stepped outside into the cool embrace of twilight, the soft glow of string lights illuminating the path ahead. In the distance, laughter and chatter filled the air, a symphony of human connection reminding us that we were not alone in this fight. As we walked hand in hand, weaving through the throngs of community members still lingering, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. These stories, our stories, would ripple outwards, igniting sparks of empathy and mattering far beyond the limitations of political declarations. A couple of days later, I found myself scrolling through a Reddit thread titled Ask Reddit, What are your thoughts on the transgender and non-binary people don't exist executive order? The comments unfurled like a rapidly blossoming flower, filled with outrage, raw emotion, and unequivocal affirmations of existence. One post caught my eye, detailing an emotion-laden story of a person who had felt incredibly alone until they discovered our community event through a mutual friend. Their words struck a chord within me, reminding me of why we pressed on: acceptance, understanding, and most importantly, the validation of one's own existence as a lived experience. This newfound drive pushed me to engage in the discussions, sharing my own reflections about the event, how every person who stepped to the microphone had shattered the misconceptions surrounding us, and how their voices were part of a greater narrative that no executive order could erase. I felt an electric connection to the thread and watched as the conversation swelled, pouring in solidarity from across the country. These digital exchanges reaffirmed a reality I clung to: people were listening, they were learning, and more importantly, they were empowered to share their truths too. A week later, at a low-key gathering of allies and friends, my partner and I shared stories and laughter over mugs of steaming tea. At one point, he turned to me, a contemplative look lighting his features. "You really think all of this matters?" he asked quietly, his vulnerability shining through the evening's cozy haze. It was one of those moments that felt raw yet comforting, where the air brimmed with possibility. "I do," I replied, the conviction thick in my voice. "Every single person we reach matters. Every story connects us, it's like our own little revolution of hearts and minds." And just as we leaned in closer, focusing on each other amid the soft hum of conversations around us, an uplifting realization washed over me. Even when shadows loom, our resolve lights the way. The world we dream of exists not just in far-off glimmers of hope, but right in that moment, between two souls, acknowledging the power in simply being, thriving, and celebrating the brilliance of life in all its forms. The executive orders, however sweeping and chilling, could never snuff out the vibrant flames of our truths. Through connection, compassion, and shared stories, we would always find a way back to the heart of our collective existence. As the night deepened and laughter echoed, I tucked away the bittersweet contours of the day, knowing that every communal embrace, every shared experience, and every step we took together transformed the narrative for ourselves, and for those who needed the strength to journey alongside us. As the night deepened and everyone mingled, I found myself standing at the fringes of the event, watching the shared joy that radiated from each small circle of friends and allies. The dynamic atmosphere was electric, a tapestry woven from countless stories, and yet, my heart felt a tug of uncertainty amid the laughter. The weight of the day's events lingered like a low fog, the chilling executive order casting a long shadow over our progress. I thought of my younger sibling, Sam, who had been bravely navigating their identity in this increasingly hostile world. They weren't here tonight, which added a pinch of sadness to my pride. I always wanted to shield them from the harshness of ignorance, yet I saw the fire in their spirit, one that refused to die out no matter the storms around them. Just last week, Sam had opened up about their struggles, the doubts gnawing at their self-worth, the troubling whispers that they sometimes couldn't silence, reminiscent of the rhetoric we had both heard echoing from the highest offices in our country. I had encouraged them to come tonight, to step out into the light among a community that would embrace them wholly. To be seen and celebrated among people who were beautifully imperfect, just like us. But in their absence, I was now reminded of how vital this gathering truly was as I watched others share their journeys with unguarded vulnerability. The air hummed with truths that often felt on the brink of being silenced by hatred. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of unity wash over me like waves lapping gently at the shore. It was soothing, yet suffocating, and I could almost hear Sam's voice in my mind, gently teasing me for being so easily swept away by the tide. Gathering my resolve, I approached a group where I recognized familiar faces, friends I hadn't seen for a while. They were deep in discussion about the implications of the recent order, but also about solutions, determined to create safe spaces, both online and offline, where everyone could feel heard and seen. Rather than jump headfirst into the conversation, I paused to listen, absorbing their determination and hope. I realized their fear was laced with a fierce commitment to change. Their voices grew stronger, noting how each of us could influence our larger community through daily acts of kindness and bravery, through the stories we crafted through our lives. It occurred to me that perhaps my role tonight wasn't merely to support Sam, but to actively participate in this movement as well. I stepped into the circle, introducing myself with a solidarity born from shared struggle. The moment felt liberating, though apprehension still fluttered in my chest. We exchanged ideas about storytelling as advocacy, about how our narratives had the power to dismantle ignorance, to build bridges where walls had tried to rise. Slowly, as the night progressed and warmth filled the air, I felt the ghost of doubt slip away, replaced by the conviction that our truths were perhaps louder than any decree aimed at stifling them. I shared my own story, both the light and darkness, how I fought alongside Sam, but also how I learned to celebrate my own identity in the process. As I spoke, I could feel the eyes of strangers turn soft with understanding, each nod and shared expression weaving an unbreakable bond through our momentary vulnerability. In that exchange, I caught glimmers of hope, of answers, of a future that seemed a little brighter than it had just hours before, even under that oppressive cloud of uncertainty. When the event began to wind down, I rechecked my phone, reminding myself to call Sam, believing firmly that they needed to hear, if not the particulars, then the warmth and support that surrounded me now. Comfort in numbers, I thought. Together, we had the strength to push against a world that seemed intent on dismissing us. I found a quiet corner outside the venue under the luminescent glow of string lights, my thoughts clearer than they had been all day. The stars were out, beckoning, and as I dialed, I became aware that no matter how daunting the executive orders, no matter how much power they tried to claim, they could not extinguish the spark we had ignited tonight. And though our fight was far from over, the voices gathered here, the love shared amongst us, and the casual way in which we held space for one another, the collective heartbeat of our truths, were timeless and strong. Sam picked up, and the sound of their laughter spilled into the night, wrapping around my heart. You wouldn't believe it. I started, offering up the colorful tapestry of stories I had witnessed as we each became threads woven into a larger narrative. In that moment, I knew we were never alone, and our fight, our very existence, would always be more powerful than any words written in the dark. I hung up feeling buoyed by that knowledge, and as I headed back inside to rejoin the festivities, I couldn't help but smile. The journey wouldn't be easy, but it was ours to take, and together, we were undeniably strong. It's funny how a single night can spiral so completely out of your control, all from a decision as simple as cracking open a bottle of wine. I've always been the type to unwind with a glass or two after a long day, especially when the world feels heavy and work drags on like a slow Friday. That night, my day had dragged on worse than usual. The air was thick with the tension of deadlines and uncomfortable office politics. I returned home, the warmth of the evening wrapping around me like a soft blanket, and I reached for the wine cooler with almost giddy anticipation. I poured myself a generous glass and sank into my overstuffed couch, the frustrations of the day gradually melting away with each sip. But I guess the day had taken a toll I hadn't quite realized because before long, I reached for the second glass, and then another, the weight of the wine thickening my thoughts into a humorous haze. Somewhere around the third glass, there was a rustling in my fridge that caught my slightly inebriated attention. I was hungry, but not the kind of hunger that made sense, more like an instinctive need to munch on something savory, hearty, and utterly indulgent. Maybe it was the salami I had bought on a whim last week. I chuckled to myself thinking about it, visualizing how impressive it looked when I had opened the package, its beautiful marbling gleaming in the light. If I had been more sober, I might have put together some gourmet platter with cheese and crackers, but my thoughts veered toward the absurd. In a moment of reckless abandon, I decided a whole salami would do just fine. As I stood in my kitchen with the fridge door gaping open, I remember laughing at my reckless decision, pulling the salami from its resting place, marveling at how absurd it felt to hold such a hefty piece of meat. I didn't have a knife handy, so I chose to bite right into it, the flavor exploding in my mouth like something delightful. I didn't even care. The world outside faded, muffled by the blissful potato-like stupor I found myself immersed in. I must have lost track of time, because by the time I finally came to my senses, salami juice coating my fingers, and with the remnants of my drunken feast scattered across the counter, I couldn't believe the sight before me, an empty package and bits of sad deli wrapper strewn about like confetti. Reality crashed in, and it suddenly registered that I had devoured an entire salami all on my own, and guilt washed over me like a chilling wave. It wasn't just the thought that I'd eaten something almost obscene or the horror of waking up with a searing headache in the morning. I remembered my partner, Julia. She had worked late that evening, saving money for an upcoming vacation, and I could already envision the look on her face when she'd return home, tired and hungry, only to find her beloved salami, our salami, reduced to nothing but a pile of discarded packaging and a strong whiff of regret lingering in the air. Julia and I had been together for over 3 years, and though we loved to joke around about food, she had always been the more controlled one, meticulously planning her meals, practicing moderation, while I often danced on the edge of indulgence. I could already hear her teasing voice echoing in my mind, "What are you going to do now, a salami guru?" But there was an underlying current of seriousness in her words, a reflection of the way she nurtured our relationship, and how I often found myself straying away from that careful balance. I glanced at the clock, and panic set in as I realized she would be home any minute. My stomach lurched, not from nausea, but from an overwhelming sense of impending shame that wrapped around me tightly like a constricting boa. My phone vibrated on the counter, bringing me back to the present as I saw a message flash from Julia, "Heading home now. Can't wait to see you." Anxiety surged through me like an electric current. I felt like a guilty schoolboy caught stealing cookies from the kitchen jar. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, babe, I'm so glad you're home. I've just single-handedly eliminated your dinner plan." I could already imagine her disappointment, and the thought twisted in my gut like a knot. Desperate for a shield, I quickly surveyed the kitchen, hoping for a miracle. Maybe if I threw away the evidence, I could spin this whole fiasco into a plausible accident? The only problem was, how do I hide a midnight massacre of deli meat? I took a deep breath and swallowed my pride, though I'd already swallowed practically everything else that night. I decided to start cleaning up. My hands moved on autopilot as I shoved the crumpled plastic and packaging into the trash, but my mind was racing through thoughts of the awkward conversation that lay ahead. When Julia finally stepped through the door, fatigue etched into her features, my heart caught in my throat. "Hey, love," she greeted, her voice brightening the dimly lit kitchen as she dropped her bag. I offered a frantic wave, trying to act casual, but the look of pure shock on her face when she spotted the empty salami wrapper was unmistakable. It was as if someone had snuffed out all the light in the room. "You didn't," she said softly, her tone a mix of disbelief and hurt. I could feel the weight of her gaze pinning me to the spot, and my mouth suddenly felt too dry to muster an excuse. I got a little carried away," I stammered, my heart racing as I fought the urge to cringe. "I didn't mean to eat it all. I thought I'd just have a slice. But then it was just so good, and before I knew it, well..." My voice trailed off almost apologetically, as though the words themselves were woven from my own shame. Julia sighed, and the world shifted around us, the air heavy with uncomfortable tension. "I was saving that for the pasta we're making tomorrow," she replied, her eyes narrowing slightly, a shadow of disappointment dancing across her features. And then, the heaviness gave way to a laugh, surprising both of us. It came out of Julia, bubbling up from her gut, the laughter echoing in the small kitchen. It was such a genuine, clear sound that it caught me off guard. "You absolute lunatic," she exclaimed, still chuckling as she approached me, betrayal melting into amusement. Instead of anger, I saw the corners of her mouth curl upward, and something inside me shifted. The relief washed over me like the tide receding from the shore. Maybe I wasn't in as dire straits as I had imagined. "Okay, I might have gone overboard," I admitted, joining her laughter, feeling an unexpected lightness spread through my chest. "But can I at least make it up to you? What if I cook dinner, get some fresh ingredients?" Julia leaned in, bumping her hip against mine playfully. "You know I love your cooking," she replied with a kind glint in her eyes, the shadows of my initial transgression fading away. As we began brainstorming dinner ideas, the night transformed from one I thought would be filled with shame into something surprisingly warm and inviting. Small mistakes didn't have to unravel our bond, instead, they could lead us to moments of laughter and connection. With every suggestion I tossed out, Julia's eyes sparkled more brightly, and it felt as though we were weaving a new story together, one where the salami mess was just a funny note in a melody we were crafting. And somehow, against a backdrop of guilt, that made me feel more like myself than ever. Days passed after that comedic episode, and I found myself reflecting on it, though I was startled by just how deeply it had changed the ambience between us. The little mishaps, forgetting to buy milk or dissecting a salad incorrectly, didn't seem so dreadful anymore. I learned the importance of sharing my mistakes with her, the value of vulnerability turning those potential storms into laughter. And maybe, on the other side of all this, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed, the ability to embrace my imperfections, live fully in the moment, and trust that whatever the next late-night binge would be, we were solid together. I penned a quick post to our/confessions someday, sharing my humorous and slightly disastrous adventure with a whole salami, chuckling as I reflected on how a drunken binge could save a relationship instead of ruining it. After all, it wasn't just a salami, it was a reminder that love can rise above the clutter, to mend the small rifts and turn them into something larger, something alive with laughter. The next morning, as the sun filtered tentatively through the curtains, I braced myself for the inevitable fallout. My head throbbed with each pulse, reminding me of the regrettable decisions I had made the night before. Julia had fallen asleep in our bedroom, blissfully unaware of my indulgent escapade. I tiptoed to the kitchen, dread coiling in my stomach, and gazed at the carnage left behind, a sight that would undoubtedly elicit her trademark raised eyebrow and disappointed sigh. I brewed a pot of coffee, hoping its rich aroma would mask the odor of salami remnants, perhaps providing me just enough courage to face her. As I poured my first cup, I could hear the soft rustle of sheets behind me as Julia emerged, hair tousled and sleep in her eyes. "Morning, sleepyhead," I called out in what I hoped was a cheerful tone, trying to lift the impending gloom hanging over me. She smiled, but there was a flicker of suspicion in her gaze as she caught sight of the kitchen chaos. The moment of silence that followed was filled with unspoken questions, and I could feel her scanning the counter like a detective searching for clues in a crime scene. About that," I stammered, my tongue suddenly tied in knots. "I might have eaten something last night." Her eyebrow arched higher, and I could practically hear her mind racing through the possibilities before landing on an incredulous realization. "You didn't?" I felt the heat creeping up my neck, and my heart raced like a frantic hamster on its wheel. Well, yes, I did. All of it. The whole salami," I confessed, unable to hide how absurdly both mortifying and liberating the admission felt. To my surprise, Julia burst into laughter, which, in that moment, seemed like the best response I could have hoped for. "You're kidding. You seriously ate an entire salami by yourself?" Her laughter rang through the kitchen, reverberating against the walls like joyous music, and I couldn't help but join in, feeling the tension lift as I surrendered to the ridiculousness of it all. I explained how it had started innocently enough, a few drinks, a buzzing sense of invincibility, and winded my way through the entire tale, embellishing the details to evoke even more laughter. With every chuckle, I felt lighter, like scales tipping away from my guilt. "You know," she said, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye, "this is somewhat tragic. But also the most you thing you could have done." "I can't believe it." I half-heartedly shrugged, admitting that perhaps it was all a little surreal to even me. Yet, as we shared that moment of levity, it occurred to me how the ridiculousness of the night had inched us closer together instead of causing a rift. We decided what better way to commemorate the absurdity than to create our own Salami Saturday tradition, turning an embarrassing confession into a shared joke that would surely linger in our memories for years to come. The laughter gradually faded into calm conversation, and over breakfast, we toasted to the weird hiccups of life that somehow knit us closer together. Reflecting on the night before, I acknowledged how that wild decision had given us a sweet, silly story, one that reminded me that vulnerability could be powerful. Life was never perfect, and neither were we, but that was part of the charm. In the aftermath, we found ourselves not just bonded through love but now with the added layer of laughter and a touch of absurdity. I knew then that, armed with our imperfections and a heightened sense of humor, we could navigate anything that came our way. Later, I decided to share this newfound perspective with the r/confessions community, crafting another post that detailed not just my reckless binge but how it had turned into an experience that reinforced our bond. In the end, it wasn't just a story of a salami but rather a reflection on partnership, acceptance, and the ability to find joy in even the most unexpected moments.